Okay. Good, good morning to everybody. It's April 11th, 2026, and as people can see from the title of the live stream, we're talking about the U.S. and Israeli war on Iran and the ceasefire talks that are happening right now. And we'll also be, I guess, discussing our preparations for our upcoming event next weekend at Mother Bethel AME Church, honoring Martin Luther King. And
Excuse me.
for the war part of the discussion, Shantanu and I will start off, and then I guess we'll have a larger discussion. But it seems like right now, actually, the U.S. and Iran have just started direct talks in Islamabad, Pakistan, after each side had kind of separately met with the Pakistani government, Pakistani officials to kind of decide what were the basic preconditions for the U.S. and Iran to meet and to even have direct negotiations. And yeah, there's been a lot of coverage of this war and a lot of commentary on the war, and I feel like, yeah, for the past couple weeks, it's just been a constant barrage of trying to absorb information, most of which no one can really kind of distill all of it, but based off of what we've seen, I think no matter what happens with the ceasefire talks, I think it's clear that Iran has won the war, whether now or in the long term. And I think it's worth saying explicitly that this is a world-defining moment for humanity, and but especially for the American empire. And I think in many ways, Iran has given a lesson to humanity. I think will be very important for the future of the world going forward. And I also want to say that this defeat is not only a defeat for Trump, but for the entire US establishment, which has been targeting Iran for decades and wargaming against Iran for decades. And the only difference is maybe that some parts of the deep state would have preferred that this war was prosecuted in a way that was more logical and coherent than the way that Trump did it. And I think part of the reason why this is such still a humiliating and crushing defeat for the United States and Israel is because their basic conception of the war and why they started it is because they believed that they could collapse the Iranian state kind of almost instantaneously. And there's a New York Times report earlier this week or a couple days ago about Netanyahu going directly to the Situation Room, I think, and basically selling Trump and his cabinet on the war, despite the apparent misgivings of many people in Trump's cabinet. And their basic sell to Trump was that if they target the leadership of the Iranian state, they could trigger a mass uprising or a civil war within Iran that would collapse the Iranian state. And yeah, it turns out Trump actually openly admitted that they had sent weapons to anti-government protesters in Iran in the past couple months. They also apparently tried to get the Kurds to start a civil war in Iran, which failed. And that has brought us to this moment in which no matter how much Trump says to the contrary, it was Trump who caved, Trump who basically surrendered. And actually, the Financial Times reported that he apparently wanted an off-ramp from the war as early as mid-March. And there was other reporting from Drop Site News that Steve Witkoff, the kind of negotiating person in the U.S., was in March texting, trying to message the Iranian foreign ministry via WhatsApp, and they ignored his messages. So he got left on red by the Iranians. And part of the reason why we know Trump caved is because even though he's since backtracked on this, Trump basically admitted that Iran's original 10-point conditions for ending the war were the basis for the U.S. basically acquiescing and essentially saying we can work with this. In contrast with the U.S.'s 15-point plan, which are completely different. Um, and the fact that Trump, in his initial statement on social media, said that it was the Iranians' 10-point proposal that was the basis for the talks shows that this is an acquiescence by the United States. And obviously, it's been early in the week was very tense for many of us, in part because of before the ceasefire announcement, um, Trump had made that civilizational threat, the genocidal threat against Iran. And I've been trying to think about like whether he was serious about that threat or not. I think that on the one hand, it's clear that Trump is deranged, and there's a possibility he could have tried to follow through on his threat to, in his words, kill a civilization, to kill Iranian civilization. But there's another possibility that maybe Trump was already planning to go for the ceasefire, and so for him, threatening genocide is the only way that Trump can feel like he's a tough guy. Be like, oh, like I made these threats, and then they back down. And it's very important for Trump's ego that he feels that he's a strong guy.
But it's still a war crime.
It's still a war
To
crime.
make that
Yes.
threat is itself a war crime.
Yes, the intent of genocide.
Yeah.
And many people have already said this, but you know, ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, this threat to destroy civilization, in many ways, the ultimate effect of it is that it's not Iranian civilization that will die, but it's Western civilization, white civilization, that is dying. And this war is accelerating that, I think. And I wanted to kind of talk through basically, in terms of the current state of negotiations, I think, you know, part of what's become very clear is that there's no going back to what's called the status quo ante, the status quo before the war. And basically, Iran has gained enormous new leverage in the negotiations, and the basic like strategic balance of basically West Asia, the relationship with the United States has changed. And I kind of wanted to just highlight a few ways that, for me, this war has essentially created new realities within the span of a couple of weeks. New, what they call like facts on the ground, which are not just material, but also political and ideological. And to start with the easiest side, which is the military side, I was listening to Nima from Dialogue Works, and he was describing how, oh yeah, you had sent it to me, Doc, how basically Israel has been running out of its interceptors, which it uses to fend off against the Iranian missile attacks. And actually, it turns out that Israel itself has expended 122 of its 150 Arrow missiles, and 22 of its 48 THAAD missiles, which it gets from the United States. And each of those Arrow missiles costs $3 million to produce. A THAAD missile costs $12 million. And the United States, which obviously has a much larger arsenal, used a quarter of its own THAAD arsenal already within the past 6 weeks. And so a lot of people, I know that this has been kind of a point of discussion online, but a lot of people who would say, oh, the ceasefire is just a ruse, they're just going to use it to, like the US and Israel will just use it to rearm. Practically, literally practically, it's not possible to just instantaneously reproduce all of those missiles within the span of 2 weeks. And the other side of the military reality is this was very clearly a larger military failure for the United States, in that you know, the supposed operation to save the fighter pilot of the F-15 that was shot down which it looks like was really a covert attempt by U.S. forces to try to steal some nuclear material, failed, in part because it was met by not just the Iranian military response, but also by basically people's warfare, by ordinary Iranians who countered this. And in a larger sense, like all of these U.S. military bases around West Asia, many of them, it's actually unclear the extent to which how much they've been hit by Iran, because a lot of this has been covered up by the U.S. and by Western media. But from what I've seen, a lot of these military bases have been made uninhabitable by Iranian strikes. And I think it was the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier that was also hit by Iranian missiles. And I saw this report by The Intercept about a week ago that the US has been hugely covering up its own casualties, where they were reporting that as much as 750 US soldiers have been either killed or wounded. And that was last week. And that number maybe has risen. But there's been a kind of cover up of how many American soldiers have even been killed. So that's the military side. The other big one, obviously, is the Strait of Hormuz. And it's obvious that the United States somehow did not think this through, even though it was kind of staring them in the face. And I feel like for me, the thing that's so remarkable about it is that with the Strait of Hormuz, Iran essentially forced the US's own objective in the war to have to change. Because originally the US objective was regime change and so-called nuclear, taking out the nuclear program. But then because of what Iran did with closing the strait, it forced the United States to change its own objective, where before the Strait of Hormuz was open, and then now Trump's main goal is to try to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and that's entirely because of first the U.S. and Israel's own actions, but also Iran's response, and that has basically changed the logic of the war itself. And all of this has, as many people have talked about, brought the world basically to the brink of a global economic crisis. And in many ways, people have talked about how this option that Iran has now put on the table of closing the strait, of controlling the strait, basically almost like nationalizing the strait.
That's very interesting.
So which raises comparisons with the Suez Canal.
Yes.
But all of this, people have talked about how this option that Iran has is in many ways more powerful than even a nuclear weapon could be. And that this option that Iran now has allows them to, that's what gives them even in the immediate term with the negotiations, it gives them enormous leverage. And I think part of it, what's so interesting about it, and I feel like all of us have been, or at least I've been trying to, within the span of a couple weeks, get familiar with all of the stuff that, even the geography and stuff. But Iran's, just to paint a picture, Iran's southern coastline is over 1,000 miles long. The part that is directly along the Strait of Hormuz is 120 miles. For the United States to want to control the Strait of Hormuz and to prevent Iran from controlling the Strait of Hormuz, the United States would basically have to occupy that huge stretch of land. But then it's if you do that, what happens when you leave? The Iranians will just take it again. And so it's literally impossible for the United States to try to impose military control over the strait, in part because of geography and the larger economic implications of it, which I think it's clear that Trump is very sensitive to, and is part of what forced him to back down, is that I think it's a quarter of global oil trade passes through the strait. And for comparison, during the 1979 energy crisis, that only impacted, I think it was around 7% of the world's oil supply, compared with the Hormuz Strait, which is 20 to 25%. And for Iran, it's not just about even the threat of sinking ships, but in many ways, what they really need, all that they really need in order to leverage control over the strait is, even at the kind of more granular level, the potential threat against ships, which makes in order for like oil shipments to kind of go through, they need to have insurance, and so none of these ships are able to sail without insurance from these like insurers in, let's say, London or in the United States, and so um, all of this is making even that untenable. Um, and just to kind of go through the other aspects of this, which I think increasingly become the more political dimensions. Um, the other way that I think Iran has changed the reality in the region and the world is through the regionalization of the war, and essentially what we've talked about, putting the question directly to the Gulf states and the people in these Gulf countries of, yeah, like how far are you really willing to go to serve as basically vassals to the United States and to protect Israel? Like how far are you really willing to go? And like the basic equation for a lot of these Gulf states is that they allow the U.S. to put these military bases there under the notion that it makes their countries safer. But in fact, it's exposed that no, it doesn't make you safer. It makes you more exposed to have the United States in your own country. And I think that that's a lesson not just for the Gulf states, but it's a lesson for the world. And like, I think I brought it up a couple weeks ago, but I feel that that's part of the reason even why South Korea is starting to take more of a direct, at least some parts of the South Korean government are starting to take a more direct response to this, in part because of Israel's atrocities, but also I think it raises questions about, yeah, like why have the United States there? Also because the U.S. had to move a lot of its THAAD defense, like anti-aircraft missiles, from South Korea to West Asia for the war. Um, and connected to that is this larger question of de-dollarization,
Yes.
in which, like we've covered or talked about, the basic premise of the petrodollar is that oil exports from the Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, like the Emirates, they agree to price that oil and to trade the oil in dollars. And in return, like we said, they get American security. And this is part of what props up like American dollar hegemony around the world. And it's what allows the United States to sanction the rest of the world. And so for Iran, with the Strait of Hormuz, to essentially mandate that payments for passage through the strait will either be in Chinese yuan or in other non-US currencies, I think will basically exacerbate the de-dollarization crisis. And that as one of the central linchpins of what we call the modern American empire is the dollar, the petrodollar in particular. And this is basically setting the foundations of that arrangement. And the other parts I want to talk about in terms of the war is on the human side, for us, I think what we're most moved by is the Iranian people's popular resistance to the United States and Israel. And really, I think we spent our Tuesday meeting in Lucian Blackwell reading group, not reading like we were supposed to, but talking about the war. And I think for a lot of us, especially I think for young people in the U.S., like there is this recognition of the heroism of the Iranian people. And it's not just, the recent stuff, but I've been so moved by, yeah, like every night it seems like people in different cities in Iran would gather and hold rallies literally while bombs were dropping. Like bombs dropping in the public squares or around the public squares where people gathered. And I really feel that this aspect of the war is in many ways what we could call a new chapter in the story of revolutionary nonviolence, revolutionary nonviolent resistance, in which, especially on Monday and Tuesday, when Trump had made those genocidal threats, it was young people in Iran, other ordinary people in Iran, who moved to essentially stand as a human chain around their bridges, their energy facilities, and essentially what we would say their civilization. And actually, it turns out that I think I wonder if that's part of what pushed Trump ultimately to back off, because there was actually there was a report, I think it was either CBS or another outlet, that Trump had seen those images of Iranians standing in front of their own energy facilities and bridges, and he was like, they're not allowed to do that. Like, that's not right. And I think it's like stuff like that. I think on the deeper subconscious level, I think it really freaks out people like Trump because they don't know how to make sense of it. Because it's so outside of their moral, it's not that they even have, but they're outside of the moral universe, that concept of sacrifice. And I think for me to say that, it's not that, let's say, it's not like we're even attributing any kind of moral conscience to Trump himself or to the US government, but rather what I think is really at stake, which is a fear, let's say on Trump's part, of a kind of overwhelming and cataclysmic political retribution if you take those actions and if you take those steps. And connected to that is what I feel has been the other remarkable dynamic from this war, which is the invocation of civilization, of the concept of civilization, in a negative sense by the Trump regime, but in a positive sense by the Iranian people and by the peoples in the region. And I think that we've said this before, but in many ways, Trump, perhaps more than any other figure in recent history, has done more to sabotage really the legitimacy of white civilization, I think, than any other figure in history. And yeah, like we talked about Evolution Vokal this week, it raises the question of when you say we're going to kill a civilization, it raises the question, well, what is civilization? Do you belong to civilization? Are you worthy of that term? And, you know, what a lot of people have been saying online, which is, why do the Israelis and the United States target not just military facilities, but schools, elementary schools, hospitals, universities with young people, libraries, holy sites that are thousands of years old? And what is apparent is that they do it because they have, like, and yeah, others have said this, but they have nothing beautiful. They have no concept of beauty. And therefore they must attack beauty. And I think there's more to say about that. But it's like, it's, you know, we've talked about this for the past couple of weeks, but it raises the question of, do Americans at this point have anything that's worth fighting or dying for in the way that the Iranians do? And I think at the most obvious level, part of the story of the mass public rejection of this war is that most Americans don't feel that white civilization is worth fighting and dying for. And, you know, it was kind of ironic and very pathetic, really, because Trump, in the midst of all this, he announced that he wants to build a new Arch of Triumph in DC, like a giant monument to himself, basically, and to try to show like how actually we do have civilization, we do have monuments, we do have beauty. And I actually think it is a response to the war and these kind of deeper subliminal anxieties and fears that the US elite have, which is, oh shit, we don't have like we don't there is no civilization that the people of this country will actually fight to defend. And I think that that's, I feel like, the longer term story of what will come out of the war. And I think also, you know, a few of us went to a candidate forum last night at St. Thomas Episcopal Church with Chris Rabb, Ala Stanford, and Sharif Street for, I think it's the 3rd congressional district in Philadelphia. And Ala Stanford made this claim when actually Reverend Ike asked about Gaza and Iran and this war question. Ala Stanford made this kind of weak, liberal, ultimately Zionist stance of, oh, every life is sacred, every individual is sacred. And it actually reminded me of this interview that Fareed Zakaria did with Ezra Klein this week, which was titled, I think it was like, "The Civilization That Dies May Be Our Own." And Fareed Zakaria made a similar kind of claim of, the meaning of Western civilization is that, oh, the elevation of the individual. And for them, you know, even the way that they process the war in Iran is like, oh, the individual lives of Iranian people are
Right,
sacred.
right,
And what I feel is so, the reason why I bring it up is because in many ways, how I interpret the meaning of the Iranian resistance to the West and to the United States and Israel is, in many ways, a kind of concrete manifestation of the idea of an individual as part of civilization, an individual under seeing themselves as part of civilization and not just as an individual. And I think the other thing that's raised by it, when you go beyond the kind of liberal thing of, oh, all lives are sacred, is when you put civilization into the mix, it allows you to see that in reality, you can't conflate all civilizations as the same. You can't conflate white civilization or Zionist civilization with the actual civilizations of world humanity. And I think this is a question that the US elite are going to have to face and that the American people are going to have to face. And so the kind of final aspect of the war that I wanted to raise is what we are in many ways the most concerned with, which is the American people, which is the biggest question. And I think it's still, to me, it's an unclear the extent to which the people's rejection of the war, how much that pushed American elites to surrender. Whether that was Trump himself or, like we talked about last week, the kind of military establishment that seemed to be pushing Trump to kind of back off, at least from the most maximalist ground invasion operations. And obviously, the thing that is clear is that based on initial polling, this has been the most unpopular war in American history. No other war within the first few weeks was as unpopular as this one. And a big part of that has been at the public, the kind of immediate level, is all of these defections from the MAGA movement or from the Trump coalition, which is people that we know like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Alex Jones, Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly. And we're basically, in terms of these influencers, all that Trump has left is people like Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, Laura Loomer, these kind of grotesque Zionist figures. And I bring it up in part because in reality, Trump needed that media ecosystem in order to get elected. He needed those people like Tucker Carlson. And the MAGA movement needs those people. It's not, I don't think it's just about Trump, but it's about that larger ecosystem that was created around Trump, which made it possible for people to get information, to get their news, all of it filtered through, you know, that, the MAGA stuff. And in many ways, like, I think now that the ceasefire talks are supposedly starting, I think that there's going to be huge consequences for Trump. I think there's still possibilities that they might try to impeach Trump. We don't know. But like I was saying earlier, I think it's not just a defeat for Trump, but it's also a defeat for the neocon and war hawk elements within the Democratic Party. And like Reverend Ike asked a question last night about Kamala Harris, and I think it's it's worth pointing out that it was Kamala during the 2024 campaign who said, when she was asked who is the greatest enemy of the United States, and she said Iran. Interestingly,
I didn't know
yeah,
that.
and you know, today most Democratic politicians, because they have basic common sense, are using the Iran war as a leveraging tool against Trump to kind of advance the anti-Trump agenda. But I don't know, I feel like it is probably true that if the US, let's say if Kamala had been elected and the US had waged a different kind of war against Iran under the Democratic Party, I feel that most Democratic politicians would have been on board. And that is really like the kind of opportunism and cynicism of most Democratic politicians. And I think, again, for us, the larger questions, though, are what have the people learned from this war? What has changed in the consciousness of the American people? And I think especially because of the, you know, the conversation we had at Lucian Blackwell which struck me a lot and impacted me a lot because at that point we didn't know what was going to happen. It was kind of a few hours before Trump made the ceasefire announcement. I think it's easy to look back in hindsight and just say like, oh, Trump was always going to chicken out. But I think in that moment, for me, it really raised an existential question of what could any of us have done if the US had decided to go nuclear? If the US,
What could we have done if the U.S.
if
decided what?
to drop a nuclear bomb on Iran, what could the American people have done in that instance? And I think it makes these questions that we talk about of democracy, people's democracy, really concrete in the sense that it so sharply illuminates the need for true democratic, genuine control over the state by the people. And something interesting that came out of our discussion at the library was that it has to be made clear that this concept that we have of democracy has to go beyond what the so-called founding fathers envisioned of a republican form of government, in which, actually it was Terrence who brought this up at the library, but that the original idea of republican government by the founders was that people would vote for representatives and the representatives would go to government and most ordinary people would just kind of be left alone. And that was the basic concept of American government that was set up. And I feel that what we get from this moment, but also from the revolutionary history that we strive to inherit and to uphold, is what, for me, for example, is Baldwin insisting that there is such a thing as a moral imperative. And that moral imperative is found when each person, each one of us, assumes responsibility for the society. And I think that that's ultimately what Du Bois and King believed in, that the people would have to become transformed to see themselves as responsible for the future. And for us, we would say, as Baldwin would say, that whiteness, white supremacy, ultimately at the level of the people is the greatest obstacle to that, because it is the abdication of that moral imperative. And I just want to end by, talking about what I think many people have been on people's minds, which is the massacres committed by Israel in Lebanon, and on when the ceasefire was announced. In one day, in their so-called Operation Eternal Darkness, Israel targeted 100 to 160 different sites in Lebanon within the span of 10 minutes. They killed, I think it's around, estimates are 300 to 350 people in one day, injured 1,000 plus people. And the larger toll of the war in Lebanon has been, I think at this point, over like 1,000 people killed within the past 2 months. And for me, I really feel that this is akin to when, for example, the Germans were slaughtering and committing mass atrocities towards the end of the Second World War as the Allies closed in. And I think what is still to be seen from all this is this larger question of, will the United States try to rein in Israel, or will they just let Israel do whatever it wants? What does that say about Trump? What does that say about the US elite? And people like, I say that because people like Tucker, for example, have kind of insinuated that there are these powerful, hidden deep state actors who are pushing Trump towards war. But we've also talked about how there are probably other forces within the state who are trying to push Trump out of it, who are trying to push Trump to like hold back. And I think we don't know the full extent to any of this, but I feel like it has raised what we feel is these deeper existential tensions and crisis within the American state. And not just the American state, but this kind of interconnected elite of the United States and Israel, who see themselves as part of the same project. And so it remains to be seen what really comes out of that, and whether those kind of deeper, more hidden tensions will kind of come more to the forefront. And just the last thing is, for me, again, what has been so moving is, the Iranian people's response to this. And especially with regards to the ceasefire agreement or the negotiations, a lot of what I've seen on social media is basically in response to the Lebanon massacres by Israel. It's not just the Iranian state, but the Iranian people saying, we cannot negotiate so long as our brothers and sisters in Lebanon and in Palestine are being slaughtered like this. And I think it raises what I feel is something that's very unique or special about the development of modern Iran in the course of human civilization, which is I see it as a state whose legitimacy rests in large part not just on its own people's approval, but it rests on its people's organic desire for solidarity with especially the oppressed in the world. It's not just about the Iranian state trying to meet the needs of its own people, but it's the Iranian people saying, we only recognize the legitimacy of, let's say, the Islamic Revolution, the Iranian Revolution of the 1970s, if we fulfill the mission, the mandate of not just not just fulfilling our own needs, but of also meeting the suffering and the oppression of the people of Palestine, for example, or in this case, the people in Lebanon. And yeah, I think it's been so incredibly moving to see. There were these incredible pictures of these mass rallies that were held in cities like Esfahan and other big cities in Iran. I think the kind of official reason was to mourn the Ayatollah, but I think it was a larger message of the Iranian people saying, we will not forsake the people of Lebanon and Palestine. And I think that that is on the minds of the negotiating team from Iran that's negotiating with the U.S., as well as I think a lot of people have seen the images of the plane carrying the Iranian officials having the backpacks of school children who were killed.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the images, the images, the photographs of some of the children who were killed in Minab, Iran. And I think that that has to weigh very heavily in terms of the responsibilities of the Iranian leaders who are negotiating. But that's what I've been seeing over the past couple days.
Could I ask, you say they brought with them the backpacks of the children.
Yeah.
I just want to ask a question. I heard a commentator, this was a military officer, make the comment that a president has never really made a statement in the sense that he would say he was going to wipe out an entire country in that manner that Trump made the statement. And what is being said is that Trump might be compromised in terms of mentally, he might be compromised. And that he might be overly influenced by Netanyahu in the sense that he's telling him that it's his duty to wipe out the Persian people because they are ancient enemies of Israel. So if through the Epstein situation, if they have compromising evidence, like through the Mossad or through the intelligence agencies, they have pictures of Trump allegedly with a 13-year-old girl who is giving him oral sex, and this girl bites him in a manner that he's injured, and the Israelis are saying they have this information, they have photographs of this, and the Mossad has it, and if they're threatening to release it, and like they're saying that if they release it, they would embarrass the president, embarrass his wife, and embarrass his whole family. So to avoid doing that, Trump has gotten with Netanyahu, and evidently the prime minister has told him, you need to fight this country because these are ancient enemies of ours going all the way back to the Persian kingdom.
Could I just make a suggestion that we let Shantu, because the two of them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sorry, I just wanted to make that comment.
No, that's okay.
So I mean, based upon that, like they're saying they want to invoke the 25th Amendment, possibly.
I think all of that's in the mix. But go ahead.
I just wanted to touch on one thing. I'm an Episcopalian, and I could be dead wrong about this because Episcopalians are pretty damn illiterate when it comes to biblical stuff. But if I'm not mistaken, it was under the Persians, either Cyrus or Darius, that Jews who had been removed from Palestine by the Babylonians or the Assyrians or whoever it was under the Persian Empire that they were allowed to return to Jerusalem. Now, I could be dead wrong about this. Cyrus, yeah, I gotta find out. I don't mean to put them down. I'm just not a good biblical person.
Okay.
But I think anytime we allow that kind of assertion, especially when it involves Israel, of that kind of, enmity and antagonism that's got a 1,000-year history, it just has to be challenged, it seems to me. Especially for the sake of the American public as a whole, if you know what I mean. But that's all.
One comment, if I could make, I rarely say much, but we get lost in the fact that Judaism is a religion.
Speak up a little bit, Rhonda. Speak up a little louder, Rhonda.
I said, I think we get lost in the fact that Judaism is a religion. You can reside anywhere and practice Judaism. There's no biblical mandate that I've seen that promises them a specific territory in the world. So, we talk about Zionism and this or that and the chosen people. It's a religion. You can be a Christian and live anywhere. You can be a Jewish person who practices Judaism and live anywhere. And I think we forget that because we get caught up in their narrative of we are mandated to have this piece of land. No, no, you are not. That is not accurate.
I actually, very quickly, I wanted to address what you were saying, John. Personally, I think that whatever compromising evidence that the Mossad might have against Trump, what he's doing right now is worse. You know, the embarrassment that he's facing because of this war, its defeat, I don't know what images they have. I can't imagine anything that's worse than what he's doing.
Wait a minute. Hey, John, let him finish, then we'll come back.
Yeah, this is, I do want to finish what I had.
Sorry.
But I just wanted, when you said that, I thought, what kind of compromising evidence do they have to make him do something like this, which makes him, the smallest person in everybody's eyes, including the American people right now, and I wanted to thank Jeremiah for providing an extremely comprehensive, outline of, the past couple of days. It has been really difficult to keep up with all of the information. You don't even know how much of the information is true, because there are a lot of different sides coming out with a lot of different reports. I did want to say something a little bit about what Jeremiah was talking about during the end, about the Democrats now using this war as a platform to promote their anti-Trump agendas. I have been seeing online a lot where a lot of people are coming out and saying that this war is not as unpopular as people think, because we don't see any of the student campus protests that happened during Palestine. Where are they right now? Why aren't the young people protesting on college campuses anymore? Where's all of that vigor gone? And people have responded to this, and I would also respond saying that, well, the Democrats have actually spent 1.5 years crushing and persecuting these students. They fired professors, they expelled students, they refused to give them their degrees because they said something against Palestine. So they have set the precedents. The Democrats have already set the precedent um, for what would happen if you spoke out against any of the wars against the empires. And it's not like it's not happening, it's just not being covered anymore because they're on a smaller scale. But anti-war protests are still happening. They're not on college campuses because they have become these havens of the political establishment where nothing there is no freedom of speech on the campuses. Um, and that also reminded me of the Ezra Klein and Fareed Zakaria conversation, where they act like this is the first time that the U.S. has issued the rules of war. It's not, you know. They have consistently um, ignored all of the international laws around war for years. On Barack Obama, Biden, everybody has, and now they are acting like, you know, like it's only Trump who's the first one to ever do it in the history of America. Um, but I wanted to start by saying that I don't think that the US has suffered a defeat like this ever. Not in Vietnam, not in Afghanistan. In those instances, the US, you know, conducted a kind of strategic retreat. Their ego was bruised, but they were fighting a kind of asymmetric warfare, and they had to, you know, they were defeated on account of such strategies like guerrilla warfare they weren't used to. But it has not happened ever before that the US has been symmetrically and tactically defeated. Every single missile that Israel and US fired, Iran fired back. That is symmetric warfare. And on on tactics, Jeremiah has already gone through how by closing down the Strait of Hormuz, they have choked the Western economy, and so that is also a tactical victory. And you know, I think I saw in the New York Times that Iran has said that there are mines in the Strait of Hormuz that they can't find anymore, so they can't give back control. They can't, you know, not be there and give up control of it. And this might be a fabrication or the truth. It doesn't matter. It matters that they have, you know, they have tactics in place which keeps them in control of the Strait of Hormuz, and they still haven't opened it up entirely. And they will not, because you know this ceasefire that happened was in a matter of hours broken by Israel, and I think that this was a sabotage of the ceasefire by Netanyahu. And then you know there were a lot of reports where after that Trump said that Israel will back off for a bit, and Netanyahu came on television and said that no, we will not back off, we will still continue our attacks on Hezbollah. And Iran saw that and came and said that we will not hold any talks until a ceasefire in Lebanon is established. That is that's the strength of the will of the Iranian people. And you know, I think that Israel. I was reading that Israel has picked fights with South Korea, Spain, France, and Japan in the span of 24 to 36 hours. And Israel believes that it can fight this war without the US, but it cannot. It needs the US militarily. And I was reading I was looking at this Pew Research poll that says that favorable views of Israel in America has gone down 18 to 20%, down 55 to 37%, amongst all ages, amongst all um, political party affiliations, and an unfavorable view of Israel has risen from 42 to 60%. And this means something. This defeat of the US means something because it tells the rest of the world that the US is not this hegemon anymore. It can't just do whatever it wants anymore. Going into the US-Iran talks, there is a clear asymmetry. Jeremiah pointed that out very well. The US is backing away from its own ultimatum. It is, and these are reports that it sort of has put pressure on Pakistan to mediate this ceasefire, to broker this ceasefire. It is urging Israel to stop attacks on Lebanon. It is, for the time being, overlooking the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Um, Even though they say that this is our current tactic, but they are trying to remove focus on the fact that it is harming the economy to such an insane effect, insane amount, because the ships that pass through the Strait of Hormuz take an amount of time to get to a particular place, and then that crude oil is processed, and then that is sent to certain refineries, and then that becomes available to the public. So whatever the American people are facing now is the closure from a few weeks ago, probably. So this is going to continue for quite some time, and that is an insane amount of pressure to be under. Um, the U.S. has signaled the willingness to release frozen Iranian funds. I read that they're willing to release like $6 billion of frozen Iranian funds, and they have indicated that the talks will be based on Iran's original 10-point framework rather than the US 15-point framework, which is completely different. That goes back to every single conversation that they've had with Iran in the past before that have broken down, which is Iran has to end all nuclear enrichment. They cannot have a nuclear facility, everything on that front. But that is not what the US is going to be talking about. They're going to be talking
Can
about.
I just say something? This is very important. This 15 and 10. The American 15 points assumed an American victory and an Iranian defeat.
Yeah.
The Iranian 10 points is based upon an Iranian victory
Right.
and a U.S. defeat.
Yeah.
So it's almost as though the victor is establishing the terms of the capitulation of the loser.
Right.
So those 10 points is Iran and Pakistan and the world acknowledging that the terms of the capitulation of the United States are the 10 points put forward by Iran.
Yeah. It's true.
Yes.
They're also sending J.D. Vance over to Islamabad,
Yes.
and this is, it's just a little strange that you are sending your vice president to negotiations with a country whose regime you just tried to change, and I don't think that itself is something that has ever happened
No, the
before.
Iranians demanded him. They weren't going to negotiate with
Witkoff and Jared
They
Kushner.
demanded that
Yeah.
someone at the highest level of the administration, and since the vice president is higher than the Secretary of Defense, higher than the Secretary of State, higher than anyone except the president, this is also hugely
Yes.
symbolically significant.
I think they're still pissed because Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are part of this delegation. But we'll see what happens.
Well, whether
with
they'll
that.
be in the same room with the negotiators is a big question.
Right.
They're there, but where will they be? Will they be in a whole nother room looking at a video?
Right.
I'm sorry, I know I'm
that's true.
interrupting you. I'm very sorry.
No, this is a conversation. But if people remember the last time that Steve Witkoff went to do negotiations with Iran, they bombed them. They attacked them.
Yeah.
So
They want nothing to do with those two.
they do not. But the point I wanted to make is
This is hugely, and it is another indication of Iran having the upper hand.
Yeah, they are entering these talks from a position of strength.
Yes.
Um, and I was just thinking that, who has more to lose in the absence of this deal? In the absence of a deal, the strikes on Iran will resume, but with diminishing marginal returns for the US while the strait will remain closed. Now, it is also true that Iran will pay a price, but Iran is ready to pay that price. Iran is ready to pay that price, and I think in the long run, in a protracted war, Iran has more sustaining power just because of everything that Jeremiah said, the will of their people, the consciousness of their people, to be willing to give up their lives for something like this, that something that mattered. Um, and you know the Iranian 10-point plan, I have them here, but I think the the points of the points that they will be talking about, I just saw this morning that they have started negotiations with Pakistan about, are Iran's retaining control of the Strait of Hormuz, compensation for damages, and I think that they plan to secure this through payments by ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, either in Chinese currency, the renminbi, or crypto.
Yes. Which is a whole nother thing.
But uh, this is also really big. This is very much, this aligns with the BRICS agenda of de-dollarization.
Yes.
They want the release of all Iranian assets and properties frozen abroad, and the end of all attacks against Iran and all its allies, including Lebanon. I feel like they will not come to the negotiation table with the US unless there is a ceasefire in Lebanon. The Israel, I think, is still trying to sabotage this because it has not stopped attacking Lebanon. I read this morning that they attacked a site in Gaza. Um, so I think that the US is in a position where it cannot make any correct moves. It's everything that it does will result in its defeat or a compromise. It doesn't have any place to go, um, because the war in Iran has already tripled the inflation. I think the March inflation rate was 3.3%. Um, Europe is also in a very bad place. I think I have a cousin in Germany, and I was talking to her, and she said that the price of fuel in France is 2.2 euros per liter. That's about $10 a gallon.
Whoa.
And it's the same in, Italy and others. So other places. So I feel like um, the U.S. Oh, I just remembered that we recently sent an Apollo mission to the moon to go to the farthest place that we have ever been on the moon, and uh, that was the day of Israel attacking Lebanon, and I was reminded of that poem that you referenced of this Whitey on the Moon. I
Gil Scott.
Right, right. I can't pay my bills, but Whitey's on the moon. And 10 years later, I'll be paying still, but Whitey's on the moon. Right? Um, and I think that this does bring me to the civilizational question. And I think that Jeremiah did a really good job of laying that out. I just wanted to add that the Financial Times had this article, I think a day or two ago, which was titled, "Trump is Surrendering America's Moral Leadership."
Ain't, I was just gonna say, I ain't never had it, but that's
But yes, this is significant because it assumes that America had a moral standing in the world, and Trump is surrendering it. When he said that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, that was something unbelievable. That was something unprecedented. Um, no matter how bad, the situations of war has gotten in any part of the world, nobody in history has ever said, "I will destroy an entire civilization." And the White House tried to say that, oh, this was kind of strong arming the Iranians to a ceasefire deal, but that was not it, because we know that everything was a compromise on the part of the U.S. The article says that this has done grave harm to America's moral standing in the world, and I asked, did it have any to begin with? When you look at um, the Iranian people locking hands, gathering around their bridges and nuclear facilities. I saw that image on Tuesday, and I was walking to a seminar with one of my colleagues, and I saw that on my phone, and I turned to him and I asked him, would you do this? Would you do this for, if something like this happened in America? And he said, no. And then I asked him, would you do this for anything? Would you do it for anything you believe in? And he said, probably not. And this is one person. This is one person that I had to immediately ask this question to, because that's what this image evoked in me. But I asked this question of every single American, right? Is there anything that we would really give up our lives for? Um, and that is the civilizational difference between, I think, the Iranian people and the American people at this point. Um, there's an Indian news reporter called Arnab Goswami. He's considered a right-wing news anchor, and everybody thinks that he's affiliated with, you know, the the Hindutva state and BJP, and so a lot of the liberal part of the population don't really give him too much attention. But he, on his show, came out and said that he condemned the war in Iran, he condemned the attacks on Lebanon, and he said that America does not have a civilization, while the Persian civilization predates Alexander.
Yeah.
He said Trump does not understand civilization. Civilization is the history of human evolution and the evolution of the consciousness of man.
Yes.
And you can see that in the Iranian delegation, which chose to call itself Minab 168, after the 168 children killed in the Minab school. On the other hand, you have the U.S. and Israel that bombed at least 763 schools and 316 healthcare facilities in Iran. The formal rules of war are being broken by the same people who wrote it. And I think because that they think that they have the right to do it. I feel like there is something like deeply, racist about their motivations for this war. Um, they think that they can change the rules of war whenever they want, and nobody has the right to do anything to them in retaliation. Um, but I think I just wanted to end by saying that if these talks succeed according to the Iranian plan, then I think that it changes the whole topography, political reality, everything about the world. It makes Iran emerge as a fourth great power after the US, China, and Russia, it would be Iran. Because Iran has established that it can fight a war against the world hegemon in the US and come out victorious. And nobody's taking them lightly after this.
Yeah, if I could just add on, I agree with both of you, and I think you did a great job of clarifying this. I agree that what we are experiencing is a never before seen set of events for the modern world, definitely for the last 80 years. We would always expect that even when the U.S. lost, there was still a escape route where they could come back. But this is, as you say, I agree with you, this is qualitatively different. And that is why the Fareed Zakarias and the Ezra Kleins and others writing in the Times, in the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, are not just acknowledging a civilizational crisis, but grieving the decline and disintegration of white civilization. And I think at this point, we can only call it that. The behavior of its adherents shows precisely that, as you say, they write rules that they feel that they can violate whenever they choose to, and the reason they feel that way is because they're white.
Yeah.
And it's a white supremacist mindset. And then, of course, the massacre of children, the genocide in Gaza, and they don't even blink or think about it or reflect. It says something about the disintegration of a civilization, which leads us to ask, was there much to it anyway?
Right.
And from our point of view, is there anything to grieve? We're not Ezra Klein and Fareed Zakaria. Fareed is a Pakistani, and he celebrates himself as having immigrated to the United States because of its civilizational values. So what you going to do now? You going to go back to Pakistan? I don't think so. But it's just the shattering of the idea of the invincibility of white people. Somehow I don't see this as asymmetric. I see it as two civilizations, one fighting a 21st century war and the other fighting maybe a 19th century colonial war, and Iran fighting a 21st century war of national liberation. But the other thing is, and this is also an underestimation of a great civilization, that Iran is technologically the equal of the United States. This is hugely significant. That what Iran has done with drones and missiles in particular is to render almost ineffective the most advanced aircraft and missiles of the United States and drones. We cannot lose sight of this. And this was, is, and will forever be an ignominious defeat. By ignominious defeat, a shameful, almost desecrating defeat, far beyond anything Vietnam was. They were defeated in Vietnam. They left to fight another day. Their system remained intact, as you point out. The dollar which is the basis of their hegemony, more than their civilizational values or even their military. The fact that Iran, part of Iran's victory, is to say that the petrodollar, I like to explain that, a lot of people don't understand this. The petrodollar, it says it was a political agreement in 1971 between Saudi Arabia and the others of the Gulf oil producing nations, which ultimately became what we call OPEC, that all oil or most oil would be sold in dollars. In other words, for example, if Gaddafi in Libya wanted to sell or buy oil in gold, that would be seen as a transgression against this financial trading system based on the dollar. So since everybody needs energy, the dollar would have to be bought, which means that there's always a market for the dollar, and central banks from all over the world, from South Africa to France or wherever, would have to buy dollars, and the dollar would always be strong and would always give the United States leverage to borrow money from its own financial institutions or from other financial institutions. I won't go into a lot of that, but that whole financial system then supported the military system. And the question of the U.S. empire coming home to roost. If the dollar is no longer the currency which most nations need in order for trade and certainly to buy energy, if that is no longer the case, who needs the dollar? In other words, nations can get rid of them, can sell off their treasury notes, and so on. This is a crisis of unprecedented dimension, will end the period of white hegemony. This is, I don't know, I see Rhonda smiling. This is a happy day, although not a period without deep crisis. This is the liberation of humanity. And I think we don't know if these talks will last for 2 weeks or 2 days. We don't know. It depends upon whether the U.S. government has the guts, I guess we could even say integrity, to acknowledge the magnitude of the defeat. Never, ever did this happen, nor was it ever imagined. Even in the period of the Soviet Union and all of that, never could this be imagined. The whole concept of peaceful coexistence between states with differing social systems was based upon a peace or détente without the overturning of one or the other system. You know, hold on, wait a minute. This is absolutely different. It is qualitatively different. This is not just a defeat of the American, but because the United States is the hegemon, because the dollar is the major currency, because the U.S. military and its allies, and because, I would say, the civilizational, what is seen as the civilizational value of the Enlightenment, of rationalism, of science, and how that is deployed and weaponized throughout the world. So nations and people say to be modern is to be Western. I don't know how this is going to play out in India, or for that matter, South Korea. Because this is a defeat for whiteness and the white narrative.
Yeah.
This is huge. This is huge. But no matter what the United States does, it loses. It's what in chess we call a zouk swang. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Whatever move the United States makes, it loses. There is no win in this situation. That is why when the Iranian delegation came into Islamabad, they were escorted by Pakistani jets. They were protected, and there were 2 planes. There was almost 71 members of the Iranian delegation, including the foreign minister and the speaker of the Iranian parliament. They came to say, we are prepared to negotiate. They told Trump, don't send these 2 Zionist agents here for us to negotiate. We won't see them. We will not meet with them. We detest them. You better send the vice president, or better, you should come. The reason Vance is there, because the Iranians said we're not coming unless he's there. I just want to underline one other thing. Had the United States won, the 15 points would have been the ground for the negotiation. But since they have lost, and Trump acknowledged this, delusional as he is, maybe it's not Trump. I know there are people who say that he was pulled back from the brink by the military, who said, if you commit these war crimes, we're going to be held responsible as well. So there could have been other things going on. And indeed, when we were at Lucian Blackwell on Tuesday, there was a sense of, foreboding. We were not happy. We were angry, we were sad, and so on. And then when I got home, found out that Trump backed off. But it could have been something, this guy has lost his mind, we have to pull him back, he can't take us all down. And in pulling us back, either he or the military said we have to accept the Iranian terms for peace. I don't care whether it was Japan surrendering to the Americans in 1945 or Germany surrendering to the Soviet Union in 1945. Whenever there is a surrender, the terms of the surrender are written by the victorious side. That's what this was. Don't get it twisted. And it's a beautiful thing. We have never witnessed this. And I am more than happy for you all to see it. And so on. They cannot win. I'm highly influenced by the thinking of the political science professor at the University of Chicago, Robert Popp. Some people say Poppy, but that's too much like a poppy store. I go with just Poppy. Robert Popp, who is, going out of his way to be all over YouTube and other places to put forward his position, and his Substack called the Escalation Trap. The escalation trap is very simple. No matter what move you make, you only dig yourself deeper in the hole. So, okay, he said there are 4 stages. The first stage was the attempted decapitation, or the decapitation, which did not bring about regime change. The second stage is the bombing, carpet bombing, to destroy the society, to bring it to its knees. That has not worked. The third stage is inserting ground forces. Now, I saw this morning that, I'm trying to figure out what is the morning and what is night for me. I've been following this thing. I'm obsessed with it, you know. But I saw this morning where an Indian commentator, I forget his name now, said that in order for the United States to carry out a ground occupation and defeat of the Iranian army and other forces, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is elite, the Quds Force, which is even the elite of that elite, but that's not yet the Iranian army. And then the volunteers, which is over 1 million. So the United States would have to have an army approaching 1 million. But then it would take some time to climatize them to the heat of the Persian Gulf. But that's just the beginning. I mean, what is Iran going to be doing? Sitting back, waiting for you all to get yourselves together in Saudi Arabia? No. They're going to be bombing the hell out of you. And then to have an amphibious assault, because they're not going to do it coming through Iraq, maybe some will, but they will have to go across the Persian Gulf, and they will have to occupy like Karg Island and other islands in the Persian Gulf as steps towards an assault upon the Iranian landmass. Now, Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq. It is the size of Western Europe. You know what I'm saying? Just think about World War II. So Pap says that that would be the third stage, but it is not a victory. You can't win. You're locked in what we call a Zug Swan, that chess situation, where whatever move you make, as Pop would say, you go further into an escalatory trap. You trap yourself further. And the fourth stage, and this is what I'd like to mention, would be the use of nuclear weapons. Now, that calculus in itself carries profound consequences. For example, a nuclear attack upon Iran, just in the first instance, would totally shut down the world economy. The other side of it is that if the Israelis, which even now Jewish commentators like Jeffrey Sachs is calling a fascist regime, we went further, we called it a Nazi regime. Fascism is the Italian variant, the less virulent variant. Nazism is the German variant, and it draws out the civilizational dimension of it and the fact that Jews are carrying out the policies and practices of a regime that killed upwards of 6 million of them. What a profound irony. The significance, because people always talk about Israel and the United States. The people are vastly different. 80% of the Israelis support the genocide in Gaza and this war. 80%, maybe more. Upwards of that number of American people oppose this war, and growing numbers rejecting Israel, which is a rejection of white supremacy. If Hitler's regime was a white supremacist regime, what do you call this?
Right.
In other words, for the Jewish people, 16 million of them in a world of 8.5 billion, how do you dictate the course of history and the freedom of humanity with a threat that if it gets real tight, we'll use what they call the Samson option. We'll drop a nuclear weapon. Well, y'all not the only ones that got nuclear weapons, number one. And the Pakistan-Iran alliance, and of course the Iran-North Korea alliance, is an alliance between countries that have nuclear weapons. This brings us to the other point, and forgive me if I'm talking too long. Sadly, with the murder of the previous Ayatollah, Ali Khomeini, and the coming to power of his son, by the way, which was not just a 2 or 3 day matter. There were many days of negotiation with all sectors of Iranian society, in particular with the IRG, with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Group, the vanguard, the spearhead, I want to use that line, the spearhead of the military defense of the nation. Very important. But others in society, for instance, the parliament, other ayatollahs and religious scholars, the decision was made, in effect, and I think everyone knew it when the decision was made, that we have to move away from the fatwa of the previous Ayatollah that we will never have nuclear weapons. To defend our civilization against these mad people in a world where too much of the world is indifferent to genocide, and they saw it in Gaza. I think once the Iranians and others saw that and saw the tepid response of the world, they said we have to take the initiative to have a nuclear weapon as a way of defending our civilization now. Not just our nation, but our civilization. And so the Iranians, this highly technological nation, I mean, it is on the level or maybe surpass the United States, has decided that we cannot leave our civilization vulnerable. And they could have nuclear weapons in a couple of months, at least enough to deal with Israel. The other thing is, if Israel has in its mind, and it does, and I think, if you were to ask me, I think there's about a 30% chance that they will unleash tactical nuclear weapons. Only 30%. This is very important. Israel is the most hated and isolated nation in the world today. They have no friends. They have one friend, and that's Donald Trump, and I wouldn't want that to be my only friend, because he's a nut and unreliable. Even the U.S. military-industrial complex and even the discredited neocons have now moved away from Israel. Well, they say, well, it's Netanyahu. No, it's more than Netanyahu. But they use the Netanyahu as a kind of a veil. Throughout Europe, for instance, you take Spain, and other countries who have now embraced the Iranians and are separating themselves from Israel. I think the world, including the white world, is preparing itself for a time when the state of Israel no longer exists. We're not far from that. But even, and if they use the nuclear weapon, it's finished. They're done. They will be kicked out of every international institution. Trade with them will be cut off. They will be boycotted. But then, there's even a military response that Iran has without nuclear weapons, and that is hypersonic missiles. And they could raze Tel Aviv to the ground quickly. And when they say we have not used our best stuff, believe them. Believe them. Tel Aviv has no defense against the Iranian third generation. We're not talking about fourth and fifth generation drones and missiles. If they unleash those, there is no defense. They talk about, Heck said, and that fool Trump, oh, we've destroyed all of Iran's defenses, and their navy is gone. Well, if their navy is gone, how they shut down the Strait of Hormuz? They got something. So all of this big willy talk, but Israel is at this moment defenseless. They are mad people. Who the gods would destroy, they first make mad. And so the best that they can do is kill children. And what they've done in Lebanon, again, they can never be forgiven for. This is a high crime against humanity. Now, I'll end on this. Hold it. This is a unique moment in the history of human consciousness. Humanity will come together in ways that it has not come together since World War II. This is, we talk a lot about a Kondratiev long wave. Kondratiev waves are 75 to 80 years, we're looking at a wave, a Kondratiev wave that is now being concluded. Now, good for the American people that they didn't support this. American people have a lot of dirt on their hands. That has to be settled. But on this one, they were on the right side. However they interpret it, however they knew it, but it's left to us. We revolutionaries will interpret history. That's why we exist. Not to run up and down the street talking bullshit. But we exist, in a certain sense, as the brain of the people. You know what I'm saying? We play that function. So we will interpret this. We will help the American people understand this. In the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, and therefore when we say that the most relevant and important voice for this time is that of Martin Luther King Jr., and we can make that case and prove that point. I just wish that point had been made last night. You understand? To invoke King. But they didn't know how to do it. It's so sad. I wish they would listen to Free School a little bit more. But then what can the AKAs know anyway? Their whole purpose in life is to party and get married to some rich person, I guess. Well, wait a minute. The American people on the right side of this, but it has to go forward in the history of consciousness. We have every right to make the argument that American civilization or white civilization is now unraveling. There is nothing to grieve. It must be celebrated. And we can make the case that this is a nation with two civilizations. And one has the potential for a future, the other's dead. Because of the Iranian victory, the Cuban Revolution will survive. Cuba will survive, and its hand is stronger because of the Iranian victory. What will become of Donald Trump? A lot of what will become of Donald Trump will be decided by the state, the deep state. I think their generals and others who recognize that if the American state is to play any role in the immediate future, I'm talking about next 2 or 3 years, this guy must be silenced or removed. All of the political forces in the country are going, I mean, the bourgeois, like we saw last night, you read the Democratic Party will have more money than they've ever had. The ruling class has to defeat the Republicans, and the Congress, the House of Representatives, must be turned over to the Democrats, and if possible, the Senate. They must begin impeachment, if not 25th Amendment operations. The guy has to, once he made those statements openly, that's how dumb he is, man. I mean, yeah, okay, all of them had that kind of tendency, but to come out and say you will kill an ancient civilization, no nation comes back from those type of statements from its supreme leadership. And I agree with you, Shantu. Ain't nobody never heard no leader of no major country ever say no shit like that. Hitler never said that, because Hitler, by the way, never believed that. This is the first time, and therefore, the credibility, legitimacy, and authority of the United States as the presumed hegemon rests upon them getting rid of Trump. Our job, I guess we'll talk about, our job will be the further and deepening education of the people and interpreting what this moment means.
I just want to ask one thing. I'm getting my information from somebody that has actually worked in the military in D.C. And what you had mentioned about the bombing level, what people don't realize now is Palantir under Peter Thiel, and the CEO is last name Clark or something. A lot of their AI devices or developments are in the military now, and the military is testing it out in Iran. Now, I have a friend of mine that served in Iraq, and the thing about Iraq and Afghanistan is the military does not want to go into a ground situation in Iran, because they don't want to get into a protracted situation where they would have another Vietnam or another Afghanistan where they're there for like over 18 years and they're fighting the ground war. That's the reason why they reinstituted the draft in December, because they're not sure if they would have enough troops if they got into a protracted war over 6 months to a year, that they have to get more people into a situation to fight. And right now, they're testing out their AI weapons because they have weapons that use artificial intelligence, and they're using that for targeting purposes. And what Trump said to the generals is they want to target the infrastructure of Iran first. If they can knock out the infrastructure, then they would contemplate whether they want to go into a ground situation. But for my friend that served in Iraq, the Army or the Navy would not want to get into a situation like that, because Afghanistan, when they pulled out, they left a lot of the materials inside the country, which left the Taliban the chance to either sell the weaponry or to use it themselves. They don't want to get into an embarrassing situation like that again.
But let me say this, John. They're already in an embarrassing situation. You know, after Vietnam and to a certain extent Iraq, they moved to the idea that we will fight, that our form of fighting will be from the air, bombing, drones, missiles. That has failed. Uh, to raise up an army of 1 million people, they would have to reinstitute a draft. I don't think the younger generation will ever accept that. But go ahead. Speak up a little bit.
I'd like to proffer a countervailing.
Speak up just a little bit.
I'd like to proffer a counter proposition of what you said. You know, all wars are banquet. All wars are banquet wars.
All wars?
All wars are banquet wars. You've heard that expression.
Maybe.
Okay? I mean, it's been proven. You don't have the financial mechanisms behind you to support war. Wars are not able to be prosecuted. That was the primary reason that Germany lost the war. Ability to finance her way to the commodities that she needed to sustain the war. The United States under Biden destroyed XL pipeline, one. They destroyed XL pipeline number two. So Russia could no longer supply energy to Germany and all the world. Okay. The bankers realize that their currency is in trouble. Everybody knows it. They know it more than we know. I did some research, and I keep hearing echo in the background that nobody pays attention to, that the energy companies in the United States quietly say that we can provide all the energy the world needs. We can. And they're talking about excluding the Gulf states. Canada, the United States, Central America, and South America have more hydrocarbons than the Gulf states by substantial margin. That's why they gave the rule of Venezuela. The issue is how long does it take to bring that oil and hydrocarbon capacity online. What you're basically saying, nobody's listening, is you're saying quietly that we can replace a Gulf petrodollar with a Western dollar coming out of the Americas.
That's what they want.
That's what they want. Okay? The strategy is this. You destroy, if you destroy the Middle East, you destroy production coming out of the Gulf states and Iran. Okay? Destroy it. That means there's only two providers of energy on the planet left. That's Russia and the Americas. Plural. What does that do to the world? That puts the world back to where it was in 1945, after the war. Okay? That's where America gained its what? Its dominance as a world power. So now what happens? Russia and the United States are still now the only two global powers left. China is still very energy dependent. It collapses the economies in Southeast Asia. It shrinks. That's where China has pivoted her market to Southeast Asia. So I triple Southeast Asia. Okay? So the trade that's available is not there anymore. It's not there because they don't have the energy. America keeps saying we have enough energy to sell the world. So it's going
Well,
to be
Trump
more
keeps
expensive.
saying that.
Listen to what you're saying.
I don't think that's
So,
true.
Okay, okay. I'm gonna let make your thesis, and I'm gonna let Jerry come in.
It's not just, listen, it's been written about, and again, people are not listening to what's being echoed in the background. It's all about money and capital. I hope that that's not what happens, okay? But believe me, they're not going to walk. This is not, there were a total of 8 crusades. This is round 1. There's going to be other rounds against Iran. This is not the first round. And America has developed weapons that are not nuclear, that they're talking about unveiling that will cause substantial destruction for the Middle East. They don't care about the Middle East. That's the reason why the United States didn't protect Qatar, they didn't protect Bahrain, they didn't protect none of the Gulf states. They were all saying, why are you protecting us? Because that's not your strategy. I'm gonna leave it there.
Okay, let me let Jerry come in to put a counter proposal.
Well, yeah, I feel like because the two main oil reserves in the North America are it's the Permian Basin, the Bakken, and then Bakken in like the Dakotas and Canada and stuff.
I'm talking about Venezuela. I'm talking about all of South America.
Right. But even in terms of that, like the North America, even like the U.S. and Canada have huge oil reserves, but I just don't think that I would love to see what you've seen, but I just don't think that they actually even have, because it's one thing to have like hydrocarbon deposits, oil deposits in certain regions, whether it's North America, South America. It's another thing to even to be able to extract all of that, take a huge amount of capital. And if, let's say, overnight, Iran freezes all global oil exports from the Middle East region, it's inconceivable to me that the Western Hemisphere would be able to, within that same time span, spin up the ability to extract that amount of oil, because they don't currently produce it.
They don't want to. You want to have a 1945 economic event. America, after 1945, it was the only world economy standing. That's why she was able to control the global economy. So now you have the same outcome. I've destroyed the world economy. The only 2 powers that are left are China, Russia, and the United States. The only 2 major oil energy producers in the world are what? The Americas and Russia. China's in a box. She needs energy. She's energy dependent. I've crippled all her trade partners. I've crippled all her trade partners in Southeast Asia.
Can I ask you a question? Let me just ask a couple
And
questions.
This is what's being talked about. The energy companies and the banks
Well,
behind the scenes. Nobody's listening.
I understand, and a lot is being talked about in a lot of different places. And, you know, sometimes talk is cheap. Let me just ask you a question. Do you see what we're now looking at as a defeat for the United States?
I see it as a setback, not a defeat.
Okay, this is very interesting. I see it as a defeat. You see it as a recoverable setback.
I don't want it to be.
I know.
I'm for that team. Just let me go.
No. I hear you. No. I hear you, Joe. No. I hear you. See, the question is, however, this is an irreversible, irrecoverable defeat. And I say this because it is not just military, but by closing down the Strait of Hormuz, it was an attack not just upon 20% of the oil, but an attack upon the dollar hegemony, which I think is at the core of your argument. And once the dollar goes, the credibility of the U.S. financial system goes. I think the alarm in Western circles, I don't know about oil, I don't know what they talk about, but let's just say financial analysts, Wall Street types, and that type of thing. What they are looking at is an ignominious defeat, and they want to know what, as they say, what happens with financial markets in the wake of this type of defeat. That is what they're looking at. I don't think this is recoverable.
If you look at the markets have rallied since the attack. Markets are up. Okay? The stock market is up. Everything's up. Okay?
Well, the price of oil is up, and
the oil's up.
Yeah, but the bond markets, the cost of borrowing. Now you got a country with, well, let's say now, a $40 trillion sovereign debt. How do you see? You can't. Wait, hold on, let me just make this point. I don't think you can finesse your way out of these existential crises. You know, I listen to what Jerry and them listen to. Ezra Klein, Fareed Zakaria, you know, these kind of public intellectuals for American empire. And I ain't seen one yet that's talking about, well, we can take this defeat and come back. What they're all saying is, this is irreversible. We do not know how we will live, well, I'm just using mine, how to live afterwards. Because they asked the question, what happens to the dollar? Yeah, they got oil. The United States got all the oil in the world, let us say, or they claim they do. And then, of course, Venezuela, you stole that. But the question they ask is not can we get oil, but what happens to the dollar? And let me let Paul come in. Oh, go ahead.
At the end of every major war, the easiest way to restructure your financial system is through a global war. So America, through this war now, will be able to write down its debt because it has to have a reason for the financial markets why this is occurring. They just need a reason. And if you look at Diallo, the economist, he wrote down empires. And at the end of the conflict of every major war, the global economy was restructured after World War
Every
I.
major war. Well, the major
War
war that, no, Joe, the major war that we're talking about is the war that created the current global system. Yeah. Right. And that is so different from now. It is so different. You can't say that a war that devastated all of the colonial powers in Europe and the Soviet Union and left only one nation standing.
You left two, Russia and the United States.
No, Russia was done.
At the end of War II?
Yeah.
No, Russia still, she took.
No, they weren't done. But let me just say this. This is a whole different situation. You could not say after World War II that it ended the West as hegemon. It just replaced the old hegemons with a new one, which was the United States. That's right. But this one is taking down the hegemon. But let me let Paul come in and we'll speak up, Paul.
I agree with your analysis, and I think with regards to Trump and like finding any rationale behind his decision, I think it's a desire that people have to agree by logic to try to find logic behind what Trump does. But I think he is such an idiosyncratic person in that role. Like if you think about the fact that Israel did try to get President Obama, President Bush II, President Trump in his first term, President Biden, all launched the war against Iran, they all chose not to. I think shows that the American elite understood the risk of going to war with Iran and the fact that spurring war with Iran could engender, like you said, a great transformation in the world economy, which is done. But that transformation is to the benefit of Iran and non-aligned countries, essentially. But I wanted to ask a kind of more historical question to you, Doc. You know, there's long been I think, historical conception chronologically in terms of thinking about Arab nationalism and how Arab nationalism was aligned between the United States and between the Soviet Union, but that was secular and rooted in Arab self-determination. And I think the thinking has gone that, particularly with the war in Afghanistan that the Soviets launched and America's response to that, it engendered a kind of religious war, like Salafianism, the Sunni movements, and that kind of displaced Arab nationalism as a political orientation in that region. So I think it's really interesting the way that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Islamic Republic in and of itself kind of represents like a syncretism between Arab nationalism and between this kind of religious and Islamic correlation in which you kind of derive your strength and cohesion as a society. And to see that, like you said, it's monumentous in world history to see that kind of reemerge in this mixture of like technical proficiency, but also a deep level of integrity and a certain kind of morality that's known as that on the world stage. Particularly in Iran's defense of Lebanon and Gaza, which you cannot make a purely rational argument that it makes sense for Iran to risk its own national security for security of Lebanon. That has to come from something else.
Yes.
And so I wonder how you see that kind of merging of the two in this pretty remarkable political correlation.
Well, I'm gonna let Nuri. She wants to say something. Go ahead. Well, I see it the way you do. That's what I was trying to say when we talk about the history of consciousness. A newness where so-called Arab nationalism, which emerges out of World War II, more or less, now joined with this new phenomenon that is represented in the Iranian Revolution, which is both secular and theocratic, I guess. But, we can't, first of all, the Afghanis and the Iranians are not Arabs. Different civilization, different languages, the whole nine. Somehow along the way, the Arabs got stuck and confused. And even the Arab Spring was not a revolutionary movement. For nations like Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia to allow a genocide in Gaza says so much about Arab nationalism. Now, the other player is Turkey. And what's the civilization of Turkey? What's the
The Ottoman Empire.
No, not the Turks, but it goes into the Caucasus but anyway, Turkey is the other, but it's now trumped, so to speak, by Iran. Turkey wanted to be both NATO and with the non-aligned movement, but it was more always with NATO. Even in the case of Syria, even talks a big game, but does nothing. So it seems that the winds of change will blow from non-Arab nations, perhaps, to the Arabs. That's the way I would see it. But
I just happen to hear one comment from the Prince of Saudi Arabia and the monarchy, and he represents some of the monarchy families in Bahrain and in Qatar and the one in Saudi Arabia. And what they're saying is that the Iranians are so much of a fundamentalist form of Islam that he sees the Ayatollah as being like a dictator in that region.
Well, it doesn't.
They were not sure if they got the nuclear weapon, how they would expand a form of Islam which would be against the economic interests of the Arab nations that are engaged.
Well, first of all,
with
hey John, let me just say this. I don't give that much credibility to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I don't care in religious, theological, because their form of Islam is so backward and corrupt that you know what I'm saying. So that's his opinion.
Right. And
But you see, the Iranians in this war attacked the whole network, which we didn't mention, the radar systems of the United States. In other words, they had Iran surrounded. And the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was closer to Netanyahu than to Iran.
yeah.
So Islam didn't mean nothing to them. It was all transactional.
But the whole thing is they're trying to build a futuristic city inside Saudi Arabia. The Crown Prince and the royal family there. They're trying to build this new AI city inside Saudi Arabia right now. So they're dependent on the economic interests coming from Asia and the West to get the finances to actually do this. Also, the only thing with the dollar is the dollar was taken off the gold standard back in '73. So the dollar is really a fiat currency.
71.
Well, it was taken off the gold standard.
Okay, but go ahead.
Like it was back during the time of Nixon, is when it was taken off. But it's a fiat currency now. So it's a reserve currency with the IMF. The problem with America is the Chinese are not buying the treasury bonds anymore of the debt because the debt is growing. And the concern the Americans have is the Chinese will open up too many economic markets and their currency, they're going to start to ask their currency to be traded with these other nations rather than trading with the dollar. And that would be a threat to the dollar being the reserve currency with the IMF. And that's what they're concerned about, because if that happens, then you would get levels of inflation as you saw in Argentina. When that currency collapsed in Argentina, the inflation went through the roof. The same thing would happen here in America if the dollar was ever taken off as the reserve currency. So the thing is that the debt has to be dealt with, and it's not being dealt with if they're constantly in war, spending billions of dollars on weaponry. They're just causing the deficit to just increase more. Because right now the Chinese have several markets in Africa, and they've opened up markets in South America as well. So
okay, but let me say this, John. Let me say something. You know, we can talk and even show how much we know, but the facts are that history has taken a turn.
Right.
You know, that's what I meant. A qualitative shift is taking place. And a lot of times we obscure what is right in front of us by deferring to a lot of details about a world which no longer or is no longer existing. We can say, without knowing everything, that what is represented in Islamabad represents an ignominious defeat of a hegemon. Hegemons don't come back easily from that. 1971 is not 2026. Something profound has happened. Now, let me just say this. From our standpoint, that is the Saturday Free School standpoint, we are looking at the meaning of all of this to the transformation of this country towards peace and democracy. So all this talk becomes aimless in the face of a group of people who say we have a political and moral task. So that's what we're doing.
Right.
That's all I wanted to say. Go ahead, Nori. Go ahead.
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I had some comments, but a lot was said. I think that when we're comparing Afghanistan and Arabia and Iran and even Turkey, we should be clear that these societies are organized differently. You know, that was one of the stumbling blocks for Donald Trump, was he just, and even media commentators today, is they just say, oh, well, Iran is just Iraq with one different letter, whereas Iraq was a Arab tribal society that was deeply ancient civilizationally. The difference between Afghanistan was tribal, but did not have deep roots of civilization. Iran is not a deeply tribal society, and therefore it doesn't come apart at the seams when you give the Kurds or the Balochis money. The other thing I wanted to say was, it is true that you know, the ruling class. You know, we've been talking about this for 10 years, so it's not really interesting to me. It is true that the ruling class has you know, plans or has ideas in motion to replace the dollar as the world reserve currency. You know, I think you mentioned, you know, Ray Dalio before has a good book on it, talking about the cycles of finance and the movement of the, you know, the capital of world finance capital, New York. You know, whether it'll be in a digital currency or a basket of currencies, you know, we all know it's going to collapse, but the answer is, what will people do when it does collapse? What will Iran do? What will the American people do? You know, I think that, yeah, there's a lot of inflation, but conversely, the American dollar has been very resilient, even in the face of crises before. You know, I think Doc, you once said, you know, one of the problems with predicting, you know, the end of a system or collapse is that, you know, you don't know when, so you might always be predicting, you know, the end of a system. But, you know, we really don't know. And then the question is, what is our ability, you know, thinking about Marxism just at a basic level, the purpose of the world is not just to know it, but to change it, to transform it. If there has been a qualitative change in the way that the world people, let alone Iranian people, but the world people, including the American people, then, you know, we would be able to observe it in our, you know, the ongoings of a day. The last thing I want to say to Joe's point is that the oil in North America and the Americas is different than the oil in the Gulf, whereas the oil in the Gulf naturally comes up to the surface in the sand. The oil in the Americas is locked in the Arctic, and it's very expensive, you know, like what Jeremiah said, to produce the capital to extract it.
No, we're talking about Arctic gas. I'm talking about gas. I'm talking about gas. For example, just South America alone. If you do your research between now, next time we come back, South America,
I will do my
it has more oil and gas than the Gulf states. Okay?
Yes.
Venezuela is thick and sludgy.
Yes.
And right now they have to do a rebuild out of the Venezuelan refinery, which will take about 5 to 6 years to onboard it into the global economy. Okay?
But the capital investment is too high. That production
No,
is
it's
called,
collateralized with the oil. So you can
that
finance
capital is marginal production. It's too
Speak up just a
expensive.
little bit.
Sorry.
It's not marginal.
Speak up a little bit, Joe.
What they're doing with the Venezuela refinery. These are not marginal investments. That's the reason why NATO, if you notice, NATO is not really hollering about anything. In fact, they just had a meeting and they're okay with what's going on, you know, with the United States destroying the Middle East. In fact, Ruto just came over and said that they're doing the work for the rest of the faith.
The last thing I remember about
Speak up, please, Samir.
The last thing I remember about Venezuela was that U.S. oil companies had no intentions of investment in Venezuela. But that's all I had to say. In my opinion, that oil production is not enough. And even furthermore, okay, even though, let's say you invest as much as they do, the investment to get it out of the ground, it's not as easy as getting it from the Gulf. and
No,
you know,
they still gonna take about 5 to 7 years to get it up to where it needs to be.
and
In
so
the United States, they're guaranteeing, they already guaranteed, Venezuela has more hydrocarbons than any country in the world. It's the richest, it's got more oil and gas than Saudi Arabia.
but
It's thick crude, it's thick, it has a lot of salt.
look,
Sweet crude comes out of Nigeria, that's like Brent Light.
I'm pretty sure Venezuela has sweet.
No, it's hot. I used to trade oil. Okay, so I know that. It's soft, heavily, it's like
I
sludge.
talk a lot of shit online.
It's sludge, it's like sludge.
Could y'all just speak up a little bit, man, so we can hear?
No, Venezuelan oil is like freaking sludge.
Yeah.
It has to be, go through many refining process. It's expensive to go on board, but it does have the largest hydrocarbon reserves in the world. And also they found hydrocarbons in all the countries surrounding Venezuela. That's when America went in there, they made basically what they were saying, that as a gangster move, is South America, Mexico, all of you better line up, okay? Argentina right now is supporting Israel, okay?
But before I hand it off to you,
They have tons of fossil fuels.
the last thing I want to say is
Speak up a little bit.
sorry, the last thing I want to say, then I'll let Joe address it, is, Joe, even if you can't get that oil production up to replace the Gulf oil, and you completely destroy the Gulf, because that's part of the condition, is that enough time to save the Western financial system?
They don't care about, I want to come out top dog. At the end of World War II, America had global supremacy because Europe had been bombed in the smithereens. Japan had been nuked. So I get the same accomplishment through the Middle East being torn up. Because guess what? The rest of the world is going to go into deep decline because they don't have energy at a price that's affordable. The United States already said we'll come out. If the Middle East is destroyed, they're saying, listen, we have hydrocarbons, we'll sell it to you. And what the response was, yeah, South Asia said, yeah, twice the price. They want to sell it at twice the price. Okay, that refinances the whole banking system. Okay, they make, listen, if you game theory this out, you know about game theory. Game theory that. Okay, they don't care about India, they don't care about Nepal, they don't care about the Philippines, they don't care about that. They want to maintain the empire. They've got everything from Canada, the United States, Central America, and South America. That's what the United States kids came out and said. What did Trump just say a year ago? He says our pivot is going to be what? To the Americas. We're going to withdraw. They came out and said it. They got oil. They got gas. So I want to blow that up. They're my competitors. The Gulf states are a competitor to the United States. South American and Central American and Canadian oil. They want to blow it up. And what are the Europeans doing? They just quiet. Rudolph came out and said, hey, we don't have a problem with the destruction of Iran. Rudolph came out and said it from the Netherlands. National TV. Did France say anything? Did Germany say anything? Did the NATO countries say? Europe is quiet. They in it together, man. They're gangsters of one feather. We the wrong color. They the right color. It's a color club. We ain't in it. I hate to say it. And listen, think about it. If you with them, I don't care about it. China's a problem. I gotta slow China down. How do I slow China down? I destroy their trading partners. How do I destroy them? Make energy very freaking expensive. Make heating oil expensive. What happens to your food crops? Americans, they already said it. What did America come out and say? If there's a war in the world, we have food. What did they come out and say?
So what are we supposed to do? Go out and celebrate?
No, I'm not celebrating. I'm saying this.
No, I'm saying
dealing with Frankenstein.
I'm saying what are we supposed to do?
We can call this, but I'll put it this way. I think the celebration of Frankenstein being burnt up in the castle may be a early celebration. I hope you're right. But Frankenstein is Frank.
Well,
No.
I think that this conversation has been interesting on a lot of levels, and I think that it is important to be conscious and aware of the motivations of the US ruling elite and their lack of conscience. I think it's good to be cautious about the possibilities because I think we know that they aren't going to give up so easily.
Yeah.
but I think that a lot of this at this point we can't fully know, and I also think that it does the people a disservice, I think, to attribute like basically godlike capacities to the US ruling elite. Like I think that yes, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of power, but I think that they too are basically constrained by reality, which is ultimately why Trump had to negotiate with the Iranians, why he became so desperate to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. I think that if the US were in a rock solid oil position, then they would be okay with closing the Strait of Hormuz, because ultimately the goal would be to just completely destroy the Middle East. But I think ultimately, even Joe, what you're saying about basically a 5 to 6 year timeline to get energy independence and to give the US like an energy monopoly, I feel like all of those things take time. And time is not necessarily, I think, on the US elite side. And I feel like some of it is also that post 1945, the US was like the only power in the world because Europe had been completely destroyed. Like even the Soviet Union had been so defeated. And I think we have to acknowledge that the situation today is not that. And the US is also not in even as dominant a position as it was in 1945. It does not produce, like it has no industrial base, and even the fact that it has so depleted so much of its like missile stockpile, even in the past 5 weeks, I think makes it very questionable how long they could pursue an actual war, even at the scale that has been existing for the last 5 weeks. And then also I think, thinking about like the 1971 oil crisis, that like led to really massive inflation, and it basically ruined the world economy for like 10 years. Like 10 whole years. It's a really big deal. And I think since then, the US has strategically tried to transition off of that dependence. And today, we are much less dependent, I think, on the Middle East than we were in the 1970s. But again, I don't think that that makes the United States God, where what's been really frightening, I think, about the last 5 weeks and the economic situation is that not only was Trump so crazy to actually go to war and to prosecute the war that Israel had been pressuring multiple US presidents for like 40 years, but he actually did it, and in doing that he basically threatened the entire world economy. And I think that in doing that you're unleashing forces that the United States cannot control on its own. I just think that that is an important thing to note. And the other element that I want to bring back into the conversation is when Jeremiah was describing the actions of the Iranian people, their total commitment to the people of, like, to the children of Manab, to the infrastructure that props up their civilian society, and like the people of Lebanon. And I think the fact that they're having these rallies in the midst of like these bombing campaigns, and like the way they were gathering around the power plants, I think it's true that that did freak Trump out. And I think that that also unleashes another force into the equation that has to be taken into account, which is that there's the level of capital, there's the level of the markets, there's the level of resources and commodities and trade. I think all of that is important, and there are many people analyzing the situation, and there are a lot of levels of complexity to that, obviously. But ultimately, the reason that there is this negotiation happening in Islamabad the way that it is not just because of like MBS wanting like the AI cryptocurrency city, or Trump, or like the oil investors, but it is also the people of Iran. It's the people of Lebanon. It's the martyrs of Gaza. And I just think that we need to talk about that as much as we're talking about the trade of oil and the commodity situation. Because I think if we only talk about the natural resources, there is very little that me as like a random person living in American society can actually do to make, I don't know, like Middle Eastern oil like more accessible, to like invest in, I don't know, South American oil. I can't really do much about that necessarily. I would like to know more about it, but really I want to know what we the people, like the democratic forces of America, can actually do. Right. And I think that in some ways that I want to investigate more as maybe one of the greatest changes that has happened since 1945 to today, where 1945, like Gandhi, nonviolence in India, that had been like a 30-long-year campaign. But since then, like it King, the civil rights movement, the Third American Revolution, I feel like nonviolence or this possibility of democratic consciousness of people actually taking up a movement and like actually responding to this thing of like, if people are suffering somewhere in the world, what can I do about it? What can I actually do myself? Not just lobbying my government, but actually like, how can I fulfill my responsibility as a person? I just think that is important and is new. And the reason why I put it that way is that like, I started reading Fanon's like Wretched of the Earth after last week's preschool because I was thinking of like how new nonviolent theory actually is and what it actually assumes about the consciousness and the capacity of ordinary people. And I feel like Fanon, like this is a little bit of a tangent, but Fanon, the way that he describes the consciousness of the people is like very interesting to me, where he says like the peasants, like that people basically will move towards violence. And the best that can be done is that for that violence to not just be spontaneous, but to actually be channeled towards something like the liberation of the nation. And he says that in that sense, it can yield a positive outcome. But ultimately, this consciousness is like relatively underdeveloped, he says. And I think that there's something about the non-violent resistance that cultivates the consciousness and the democratic capacity of the people in a new way, in a more sophisticated and advanced way than I think the sort of violent uprising, the spontaneous rebellion. And I think that ultimately what you see in the actions of the Iranian people and like, yeah, the Lebanese people, like the people in Gaza, I think it's not so much of like, oh, like, are they being peaceful or not peaceful? But I think it's the question of how is their consciousness actually expressed and how does it get channeled into something that can actually yield changes on the world stage. And I think that the other reason why I was thinking about King is that with the Third American Revolution, I feel like a lot of the reason why people in America, like people, like black people in the Montgomery bus boycotts, it was seeing what was happening in the world and seeing all these darker people winning their freedom. And the way that King goes to Ghana and sees Nkrumah and the Ghanaian people's independence. And they see that and they learn from it and they're like, why can't we do this here? We surely can. And if we can, like, we should. And yeah, I just think that for me, like, I would like to learn from basically like the world situation and to actually try to analyze what forces we have to strengthen our hand, because it is a really delicate situation. I think that what's happening and the way that it has unfolded is actually something that's new. It doesn't mean that success is guaranteed. It really does not. And I think that's why we have to be careful and cautious of what the ruling elite might still have up their sleeve and probably does. But ultimately, I feel like we want to strengthen our position, which is the position of like darker humanity, seeking peace, and seeking an end to this empire that has basically like terrorized the entire earth for the last 80 years. And so I just feel like I want to be cautious, but I also feel like there are a lot of new phenomena that are unfolding and that I think have like basically shown themselves over the last 2 years too. And I think if anything, our job as Free School would be to actually explore that and to investigate that and to understand like, what do the people actually have now and how can we lend weight to that?
Yeah, like I like the way you put that together, Nuri, because especially even in the beginning, what you said, where you're like, that it's one thing to assess, like in some ways it's kind of like different definitions of power. It's one thing to assess levels of capital, but what about also assessing another force or another power that we could define as like a moral force or spiritual power? And hearing you talk, it reminded me of, because like really putting together the first day event, we're going through so many speeches of people like from Baldwin to Sukarno and Lumumba and of course King, and hearing Nuri the way you describe or like what Nuri said in the conversation, in some ways you could say that what the Iranian people and also their extraordinary leadership, both the military but also those spearheads, that what they have done in a way that we have not seen, or like they've just done it in such a magnificent way, is that they are placing on the world stage a force to take seriously.
Yes.
And it is not just a military force, it is a moral force. And it just reminded me of Sukarno's opening speech at Vendôme, because going off like what Joe was raising about, kind of what Joe put on the table is basically like, is what we're seeing today just another iteration or repeat of 1945? And what we're arguing is that there's a qualitative change, not just in terms of forces, but in the people themselves. Like the people and their consciousness have changed since that point. The civilizations we've created have changed. And I think in some ways what happened after the aftermath, what happened after World War II was, besides America becoming a singular hegemon, is that with Bandung, for example, you had all these newly independent Asian and African nations coming together to basically in their youth as sovereign nations, really asking the question of how do we not take our freedom for granted? How do we ensure peace? And in some ways they were too young. They were too young in that moment to really succeed. And you see that with all the assassinations and the overturning of these newly freed states. But now what we're seeing is more mature, a more mature people, a more mature, darker people, especially exemplified by Iran, let's say, who it's not the time of Mossadegh anymore. Instead, like, I like the way Paul put it, Iran actually has to be seen as not just an Arab, you cannot see it as just a nation state, but you must see it as a people who've decided a greatest defense against the West, even in white supremacy, is even for us to take our own civilization seriously. Our state must be consolidated also through civilization. There has to be a moral and spiritual basis. That is why, because people always characterize Iran as religious zealots. But actually, in some ways, when you hear the Ayatollah who was martyred, when you hear him speak, you're just so impressed by this man who not only takes history seriously, world history, but he takes religion seriously. And not because he's a religious cult leader, not because he's a religious zealot, but when you hear him talk, he takes religion seriously because he believes man is meant for more. And when you hear him talk, he's actually not that dissimilar from the way someone like Martin Luther King Jr. or even the Honorable Minister Farrakhan takes religion seriously. Not because they're just religious zealots, but because they think there's something about religion that sharpens the struggle of an oppressed people to not just free themselves, but make freedom permanent, to make unfreedom, to make war humanly impossible if man himself changes. And that's why I think this is me just saying, I think there's a new moment. And this all comes back to America because like, I just think this concept of there's a battle of two civilizations that has never been resolved. But to see that this is not a nation where there's only one white supremacist civilization, but there is a hope of an alternative civilization, like people like Farrakhan, people like King, like all the people who are asking these life and death questions of, like, what is the meaning, what is the point of even having more children if we cannot move forward, if we cannot finally resolve, bring it to the end, that we don't need white supremacy. This is not a nation that needs white supremacy. Economically, materially, socially, but actually white supremacy is the enemy of anything we determine as progress. But yeah, I just thought it was deep. It's deep because bringing up the Saudis, for example, I don't think there are people who even take religion seriously. And an example of someone who does is, like, it's pretty amazing to actually kind of study seriously the Iranians, because, like, what Jeremiah was raising about all these ordinary Iranian people, like flooding the nuclear sites, or like standing on the bridges saying we will defend this. I mean, that is a show of, like not just political maturity or a maturity of the people's consciousness, but it is also a show of, it is a flowering of their civilizational understanding. Like a civilization of an oppressed people, a civilization of a people who refuse to bow to white supremacy. And I think that is just one, that is a strong example of a change in the, a qualitative change in the consciousness of darker humanity who I don't think we in America know enough. I don't think we know the Chinese consciousness, I don't think we know the Iranian consciousness, but now is the moment, just like the moment of the Bandung conference and the Black Freedom movement, like Nuri was pointing out. This is the time for us to really understand and embrace that intertwined nature of our struggles.
Yeah, just to add on, I feel like it's objectively true that Iran had a strategic card to play, which was the Strait of Hormuz. Not every country has something equivalent to the Strait of Hormuz. And so, does that mean that every darker country that doesn't have that is doomed, basically? But I feel like the larger point that Emily and Nuri are raising is that yes, Iran had that card to play, and they did play it, and that shaped the outcome of the war. But ultimately, what has moved people across the world, including people in the United States, is not the strategic brilliance of using the Strait of Hormuz, but it has been the sacrifice of the Iranian people. And both the tragedy of the martyred children and all of those people who were killed, but also the willingness to embrace sacrifice on the part of ordinary Iranians. And I feel like it's, in many ways, what I feel in this conversation is that the past 75 years have sometimes proven, but I think in general created this idea of, like Doc said, the invincibility of the Western ruling elite, of the American ruling elite. Created this idea of these people will always win. They'll always find a way to game it out and to find maximum advantage. There will always be these conspiracies. And it's true, they overthrew governments, they waged wars, they precipitated enormous violence. And at the same time, what we're trying to grapple with is a world that is changing and which will not be defined by that basic assumption that they will always win. And I think that it takes a kind of leap in consciousness to see that, or to want to see that, or to try to understand how the world is changing. And I think part of that, like they said very well, was the idea that we can't just adopt the assumptions of the elites themselves about the world. We can't adopt an assumption which is just economistic in terms of understanding how the world works. Because at the root of that is not just an economic assumption, but even what Joe was saying. Let's say if they were to try something like that of destroying the Middle East, trying to basically prop up the Western Hemisphere as the sole source of energy production, along with maybe Russia. That is not just an economic logic, it's a white supremacist logic. Because in doing that, you would be plunging all of Asia, all of Africa, into literal, like, starvation, actual genocide. Like, that level of machination, of planning, of basically plunging the entire Eastern world into energy darkness overnight would be genocide. It would be multiple genocides across the world. And in order for them to even have that idea, it's not just because they're capitalists, because they're white supremacists. They think that's what gives them permission to think it's okay to do that. And I feel like that is, in part, the logic that we're trying to say there is an alternative to that even, as well, which is what King represents, which is people like the anti-colonial freedom fighters that we look to in like the Bandung movement. There is an alternative force, which is a moral force, that also shapes history. And I think that is the force which is felt the most deeply by the peoples of the world, especially the darker peoples of the world. But yeah, just to like reemphasize that.
Without China, we're without a hope. I really mean that soldiers out. India already, they were in Israel. They're not defending. Okay? Without China, and to me, I think this whole thing is being targeted at China. Stop China at all costs, because with China, Africa develops, Central America develops, the entire non-European world can develop. It can excel at an unbelievable pace. Okay? That's what I feel. My biggest fear is China. They're doing all they can. In fact, even Rudo came out, you heard him say, he said China is our biggest threat. This is all targeted around China. And a lot of people don't see it that way, but I see China. China is accelerating way beyond the United States in terms of technology, engineering, and they have a consciousness for humanity. They want to be at peace with the world. They believe it's a win-win for everybody. They don't want that. White supremacy wants a white win. That's a win. Any other win is not a win.
I just want to say, I think what both of you have been saying is extraordinarily well put. And about like this other force in the world, this kind of more force that's not quantifiable, but that's deeply felt. And obviously, like, we speak to that through religious terms. It's really the only way that we can kind of bring it to light. And I think it's interesting, like bringing it home to the United States, that the rise of the U.S. empire over the last 80 years, and not to say that the U.S. wasn't some degree of generation before that, but the rise of the U.S. empire for the past 80 years has also come hand in hand with a deep perversion of what is the dominant religion in the United States, which is Christianity, and religion in and of itself, and like our understanding of what it means to have a relationship with God, or to be held accountable to anyone, because really that's what it means, that believe in God. There's something larger than you to which you are accountable, that kind of constrains your ability to do whatever you want. And I think in the United States, the way that the country has acted can only have come about with this deep, perversion of Christianity, deep generation of belief. And I think that for a large part of the world, that really became clear with Gaza, because Gaza was the first time that everyone could watch this complete erasure of limits. Everything that we thought we had built up through a whole history of intellectual traditions that are bound in kind of a religious vacuum from which we then derive our intellectual and our political ideology was completely eradicated. And there were no lines whatsoever. And it just made the kind of banality of American imperial power just there for everyone to see. And I think it's so interesting that that is then being counteracted by a moral code, of course, which we can't directly speak to, but that we know is there. And I think that will have reverberations here in the United States as well, like throughout people who find themselves or consider themselves to be people of faith. How does that faith then exist in a country which is no longer an empire? Because I think that is the end state. This country will not be an empire because it's going to be a multipolar world. We will no longer be the hegemon. We will have to deal with our issues internally, and that's going to create changes that we can't see yet. But we're going to have to speak to something about the kind of moral vacuity which has come about in the United States that has to be counteracted if it's going to be any kind of reasonable coexisting force in the world.
Right.
What kind of force was that you said at the end?
A force of coexistence in the world, a force of coexistence in the world, as opposed to the dominating force it's attempted to be over the past 8 years.
Well, I was hearing that a lot of people believe MAGA is a white nationalist attempt to hold on to the white majority because they realize that immigration and the natural birth rate is not able to replenish the white population where they would get a majority going into the future. So they instituted MAGA to reform the Voting Rights Act, take race out of the Voting Rights Act, and to reform the immigration laws so they have more control as to who comes into the country. But the only thing that might come up is that the only thing that's propping up the economy now is the investments they're making in artificial intelligence. Because at the white collar level, they're saying that they don't want to hire a lot of new people into positions if they think they can get artificial intelligence to do a lot of jobs people have done in the past. So the only thing is, if people have a corporate mindset, they, even if they're well prepared academically, they may not be able to get into certain corporations because of the fact that they have this artificial intelligence option they can use. Also, what has happened recently, over 500,000 black women have been fired out of the private sector, or they have left the workforce. And what's happening now is you have black women as a cohort. They're the most educated cohort out of any ethnic group in the country, meaning they have the most education, the black American woman. But I personally know of a situation right now where a black American woman, she's in her early 40s, she has a law degree, she has a master's from Columbia, and she has an engineering degree from UVA, and she was recently fired from a medium-sized tech company. So there's a backlash against DEI because she was the DEI officer. So a lot of these companies do not want to recognize DEI, or they want to, if you have other minorities in the office who may be Chinese or Indian or Arab, whatever, they want to pit people against each other. Meaning that the black person who's the corporate executive or who's at the C-suite level, they want to put them where you have to earn your job more than somebody who is a recent immigrant, where this person is more like an honorary white person, or the person is treated like a white person, and they take on that role where they feel like they are white even though they're not white in origin, but to take it over because you're in competition with somebody else for a particular position or to get a promotion, you automatically would put down the lower income Latino or the lower income black who is on the same career track as you, because it's a competition.
Could I ask you a question, John?
Yeah.
Do you believe that ordinary people, working people, have agency, or are they just pawns?
In the current system that's forming, and I'm not an expert in terms of the corporate workplace, but what I'm being told is that the C-suite level, when you're in like the senior executive level, it's so competitive now, and the whole thing with artificial intelligence taking over a lot of the entry-level positions. So even if somebody goes to a real good university and gets an economics degree or whatever, finance degree, whatever, and they try to get an entry-level position, because the artificial intelligence investments are so great right now at the corporate level, they don't want to take people in, and so the competition level is astronomical. Because right now, Oracle recently fired a bunch of people from there, and some of the other tech companies are firing people because they want to make this investment in artificial intelligence. So, if you feel that you're a favorite minority when it comes to employment or in terms of getting into university, then people are taking that option rather than put your stake with a group that has been, displaced or has been a lot of, in terms of discrimination called at them, rather than, put your stake with them. You're going to put your stake with the option to say you're an honorary white person. You can move in circles that elite white people move. And that's what's happening. Like if you look at the Supreme Court case at Harvard against affirmative action, that case was brought up by Asian students who had applied to Harvard, who had higher SAT or GPAs than blacks that were trying to get admitted through the affirmative action policies. So there's a lot of competition right now that's going on.
So you don't believe in the agency of people? You think that people are at the whims of these forces?
Yeah, right now the economic forces with artificial intelligence investment, what I'm being told, artificial intelligence investment is what is propping up the economics of a lot of the corporations right now.
But it's a deeper level of assumptions that you have.
The main assumption now, like I said, I'm not in the corporate workspace, but what I'm saying is that.
But it's not about the corporate.
But in terms of levels of competition, that's the most competitive space. When people get into that, they're basically playing to win. So therefore, because of the fact of the matter is they can command salaries that if they come from a modest background, they wouldn't have been able to do. So in terms of the level of competition, you know, people are not going to exercise the option where I'm going to identify with an oppressed minority if I think I have the option where the dominant group, which is the elite white group, will accept me and see me as one of them. I'm not going to align myself in terms of my politics with people who have been oppressed for like many years.
So you're saying people make moral decisions
Right,
based
yeah.
off of economics?
Right, yes. Definitely that, definitely.
But I think that we have a class of those people and we call them the PMC, the professional managerial class. But I think that what we have, what we say is that most of the people are not like that. Like their
Well,
morality is not determined
I
by
would beg to differ
the
that most
economics
people are
of.
not like that. I would beg to differ with that. I don't think that's the case. I think people think of themselves first, and it depends on what their career path is. And so people are going to look out for number one first.
Let Nuri come in.
Right.
I think in America, people definitely are socialized to think of themselves. And I think some of that is actually when that dynamic becomes expanded on the world stage. I feel like part of this whole problem has been that America and the white supremacists and Donald Trump see it as a zero-sum game, like by definition. And ultimately, that mathematical calculus becomes so naked such that Trump literally said, if a civilization has to die in order for me to win, I will go there. Like, he did say it like that. And I think ultimately that is what, like you're saying, when people choose to say, I don't side with the oppressed because I think that it can help me to win. I think it can help me to get a little bit more. And I think it is true that largely American society has operated on that logic. But I feel like ultimately I think what the question boils down to is whether we as a people or white people as a people or Americans are going to continue to live that way. Because part of it is that for me, like why I'm so interested in better understanding the consciousness of the Iranian people is that one could argue that that was a zero-sum game, where they could accept the negotiation and accept the end of the war, and then be like, oh, like the people of Lebanon, I guess, will just have to suffer in order for us to have this peace, or in order for us to now no longer face these bombs. And I think but they don't. They say, no, we can't accept this.
Right.
We cannot accept a zero-sum game where we're safe and other people have to die for us instead. And I think the fact that they are able to say that, and that it's not just two people saying it in the country, but that it's thousands of people collectively deciding, we do this not just for our children of Manab, we do it for the people in Lebanon, and we do it for the people in Palestine who are still dying, who are still not free. I think that is the only thing that can actually like basically turn or subvert this thing of like, oh, like I'm allowed to be a coward because I just need to get ahead. And I think that it needs to be exposed on that level because it's either, I do think ultimately the choices for the American people are either I'm okay with killing an entire civilization just so that my oil and gas price, I don't know, like just so that I can be comfortable, maybe for another day, versus I'm willing to suffer, I'm willing to sacrifice so that nobody has to suffer like this anymore. Right. I think it's that like nakedly clear today. And I feel like we just have to see it that way, where I know that many people are under like many difficult situations. It's not easy, but I feel like the point is that as human beings, we have to choose how we actually want to live. And I'm tired of making excuses for people to say like, oh, like I just have to do this. I have to be a coward. I feel like at this stage of like, I don't know, 2026, the 21st century, I just feel like human beings have to have moved a little bit beyond that time of like, I need to stab somebody in the back just so that I can do okay. And yeah, to see the people of Iran standing up and making that decision, I think says a lot about how advanced their society actually is. And I think it's shameful that for so long, the American media establishment like basically condemns Iran and says, oh, you're backwards, like you oppress women, like you can't do anything, you're so primitive. but then it's our society that doesn't like see the humanity of our own children. And I just think that like ultimately that moral choice is what will define whether a society deserves to exist in this world or not. And I think that's also why at this point like the nations of the world have turned on Israel. And I feel like it's been too slow, but I still think that it means something that even, I think somebody was saying like Israel, Spain, France, even like South Korea and Japan, part of that might actually be for economic reasons, but I think it is also a moral thing to say like, no matter how much I've benefited up to this point, like there comes a time when like it's not okay anymore. Yeah.
Could we go on to the?
Or should we read comments first?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
I can read comments. There are a lot of comments and some discussion amongst commenters in the chat. Bombalai Todd, Sparks, said good morning. Bombalai said, I really think that Trump tore up the JCPOA. What is that?
The Iran nuclear deal.
The
with
nuclear
Obama.
deal in order to go to war with Iran. He also didn't like the fact that Obama was involved. I think Jacob Carpenter, Heidi say good morning. People said great analysis, Jeremiah. Lao Tzu asks, based on last week's discussion on nonviolence, I wonder how Iran could use this philosophy to ensure its survival in future against military aggression. But I think, and then BK Kari had responded saying, the Iranian people are currently utilizing audio and visual art as a nonviolent tool to positively influence the global working mass, and at the same time not monitoring themselves. Then SG asks, what is American civilization? They don't have a concept of what it even means because they don't have any to respect others. Fire H says, there's a weird situation in Lebanon. Israel was told to stop their aggression, but they're inside Lebanon occupying, and Hezbollah want them out. So there will be attacks from Lebanon, even if there is a ceasefire. Then, let's see. Lao Tzu asks, question for the panelists. Have you designated an amount of time for people to make statements and ask or answer questions? They ask what our procedure is for working through concepts. And then I think later had also asked, sorry, it's hard for me to find all these comments. But basically, we usually have a few people present and then set in some ways the terms for discussion where we could talk about anything and everything. But I think for Free School, we're committed to the political and moral education of the people. And so we try to have a conversation focused on that for those ends. Let's see. Lao Tzu had also asked whether the U.S. and Israel are in Zugzwang, which we had addressed later, like an hour later. There was more of an economic discussion where Kari said the U.S. is pushing stable coins as the new vehicle to buy U.S. treasuries and to get programmable currency via blockchain, which I do not know. But Todd responded to Lao Tzu's question about nonviolence, saying, arguably, Iran has been employing nonviolence all along. Jahan asks, has any nation not only defeated the U.S. empire, but sustained the sacrifice of everyone, from its top leadership to school children, steel workers, and street sweepers? Iran seems to have conquered death and turned it into a weapon for the oppressed. Bombalai says the U.S. is thereby declared a terrorist regime. Then Bombalai says if you travel through Europe, you would quickly notice that they make fun of the USA. They call it double standards, hypocritical, stupid, and more. The U.S. is losing respect rapidly. And then SG said Fareed Zakaria is Indian by origin. His parents are journalists, at least one of them, I think.
Indian, I thought it was Pakistan.
I don't know. I think he called himself Indian.
Okay.
But Kari said China will largely rebuild Iran and benefit from their oil, while Western Europe will be vassalized by the U.S. by being dependent on U.S. energy exports. Once the Western military-industrial complex abandons the Middle East, they will retreat back to the West and ultimately wage war on the citizens of the Western nations via hyperinflation. Jahan says, this war must make us review the significance of the Iranian Revolution as one of the great civilizational movements of modern times.
I think I agree.
One of the challenges facing Arab nationalism is that it was the product of military takeovers by small groups of patriotic military officers against monarchs, who then pursued a project of modernization. In contrast, even Western academics admit that the Iranian Revolution succeeded through one of the largest mass movements in history.
Yeah.
And it came to fruition after several decades of intellectual ferment. Yeah, I think, yeah. Shahzad Muqaddam says, I think it should be the prime directive base of civilization. What you believe and practice in your own space and in your own privacy is what you do, but the world and nations need objectivity. Okay. Bombalai says, it seems to me that Iran is actively trying to prevent civilian casualties. Just look at what they do. They don't bomb schools full of children and hospitals. And then SG questions that, asking if Iran has not attacked any civilizations, and then says, it's obvious, it's not hard to say, but people don't want to say that Iran seems to be adhering to a higher moral standard than the US. Then Lao Tzu asks about a clarification of what asymmetric warfare is and whether the nature of 21st century warfare has changed due to the Ukraine-Russian war. And if it has, is the US now antiquated or backwards in its military technology? Kari says that the West needs to lessen dependence on centralized industry and services, basically decentralizing with like food gardens, and saying that Western life will look much different moving forward. We must detach from the society that preys on us and understand our wants versus our needs. And that because China manufactures for the whole world, if the West stops China, they can't build AI data centers. Let's see. And yeah, it just says once again that once the dust settles in the Middle East, Kari thinks that the Western ruling establishment will shift their aggression onto the ordinary people of the West. Magna says, to Emily's point, it is beautiful to read about the the new international economic order, the NIEO, in the 1970s. But in our times, Iran is actually enacting it. Let's see. Dan Feldman asks, what relationships in the current global system feel the most strained? And which of those strains look like they can no longer be resolved within existing institutions? I feel like the West feels the most strained to me, like the relationship between some of the Western nations. Okay, and then, And then Todd responded to Lao Tzu with this ongoing question or conversation about nonviolence and how Iran or modern peoples are taking it up. Says nonviolence is not pacifism. Defending oneself against a psychopathic Epstein regime complies with nonviolence. And then those are basically the end of the comments.
Those are good comments. Yeah. Well, so next week, instead of free school here, we'll have our event on Friday evening and Saturday during the day from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's a 2-day event titled Freedom and Sacrifice in Our Beloved Struggle, a tribute to Martin Luther King Jr. And I think actually this conversation helped clarify that the 2-day event, in some ways I think we're still, with each day and each week and each free school, it becomes more and more real how important it is to pay tribute to Martin Luther King Jr. as not just a father, like an important father of a new nation, but most importantly as an equivalent martyr. Like the way we talk about the way the Iranian people have grieved and try to make meaning of the martyrdom and sacrifices of both their top leadership, but also those school children killed. That there's something really important about us grieving Martin Luther King Jr. and seeing him as a great martyr and a great leader. But I think we're gonna, through the 2 days, we'll do it in different ways, but we'll pay tribute to King as a man who showed us there is a way out, and that we will have to give something up as a people, which is whiteness, and it will require sacrifice. Sacrifice not just for ourselves, but for humanity. The way, for example, the Iranian people are willing to do. And so the first day we'll pay tribute by holding a musical and artistic narrative of revolution in America in celebration to kind of mark the 250th, which the city is celebrating, the 250th year of the U.S. But we're not going to do it in a hurrah, we're so great way, but rather to tell the real story of the unfinished democratic struggle in the country, starting with the defeat of Reconstruction. And we'll be using the voice of King, selection of his speeches, which we think immediately speak to the American people today, a people who are stuck in a wilderness, who we think since 250 years ago have been looking for exactly King. And then there will be dramatic recitations of freedom fighters from the Black freedom struggle, as well as world revolutionaries. And it will all crystallize with a concert by the Stylistics Review and a tribute to John Coltrane by Bobby Zinkle and the Wonderful Warriors of Sound 5. And there will also be dance throughout the narrative. It should be really good, and we're excited for people to come. And then Saturday, we will have a serious political conversation about kind of, in some ways, similar to the questions that are organically being asked in free school today, but also even at the Congressional Candidate Forum that we went to last night. Questions of war and peace, which are not abstract questions, but actually questions of the future of the country. And also the questions of what kind of human beings are we actually producing in this country. So the town hall, we'll have a panel on Saturday, April 18th, to begin the serious political day.
So Emily, you said we're starting at 10 on Saturday?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, what time did you think it was?
I thought we were talking about 12.
No.
I'm sorry.
It's at 10, because the panel, which is titled, Can America Move Beyond White Supremacy? King Speaks to Freedom Fighters Today. That panel will have Reverend Ike Miller, Michelle, and myself, and Blaze, and it will be moderated by a member of the Free School, which is to be determined. But that will be a conversation basically about how King, but also this revolutionary core, this revolutionary vanguard of the Black freedom struggle of the 50s and 60s, directly speak and give guidance for today, for the life and death questions that people are asking about how do we actually move forward? How do we, in this moment, actually transform the country as part of the world transformation? And then there will be lunch, and then the town hall, which is we're excited about in the afternoon, titled Renewing the Struggle for Democracy in a Time of War and Chaos, Our Moral Responsibility. That town hall will build on the panel and really talk about what are our revolutionary strategies right now. So we'll build on the conversation from the panel. That will have Reverend Carolyn Cavanis, Arthur Sudler, who is the president or the director of the Historical Society at St. Thomas, which is Absalom Jones's church in Overbrook. It will have Dr. Montero, and lastly, we'll be joined by Catherine Blunt, and I think Oliver Franklin, who's a documentarian, but we'll see. So that town hall will directly answer about how do we actually move forward in the central questions of today. And Friday, there will be dinner provided, and Saturday, there will be lunch provided, as well as refreshments. I think those, and I guess I'll just announce, we will put in the chat the donation link for all those who, especially if you cannot join us in person but want to help make the event happen. We're taking donations and contributions for the event. It will go directly to paying the honorariums from the musical performers, like the Stylistics Review, and Bobby Zinkle and the Wonderful Warriors of Sound 5. So if you would like to help us make the event happen, we'll put the GoFundMe link in the chat. I think that's it.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about our conversation, or just processing a lot through our conversation, and I also wanted to say that I appreciate our rediscovery of King as free school, because I think the last time we had done a 2-day tribute was also in April in tribute to his assassination and also his Vietnam War speech. And that was during the year of James Baldwin. And I was even trying to remember some of the formulations we made then, 2 years ago versus today. But I think where we have arrived in this year is, and I get this from something you had said, is the rediscovery of a king strategy for the 21st century. And even some of the final remarks you were making about what is to be learned from this situation. I mean, first, it was really moving, some of what you said, like even that you're so grateful that the young generation can see this type of heroism and achievement on behalf of, yeah, the Afro-Asiatic world today. I thought that was very important, and you're right. Like, I've never seen something like this, and it's gonna take me a while to absorb and to crystallize, how it affects my sense of, I mean, even my political imaginary. But I just really wanted to pull out something that you had said at the end of your remarks about how our work in free school is to give the American people, and especially the young generation, a way to interpret the significance of the war in Iran and to connect that with our invocation of King. And I think I see more and more so the two as very intertwined, because what we saw with the achievement of the Iranian people, I see it as like a battle or a war of a new type. And effectively, like what I'm getting, especially from a lot of stuff that Nuri and Jeremiah, you guys had shared, is that the nonviolent resistance of a people of civilization. And I want to say that because I almost think that civilization and nonviolence can be talked as like maybe almost the same thing at this point, or that I see them as companion categories or companion concepts. Like the mobilization of the civilization of the Iranian people, being able to effectively achieve like something even like nuclear disarmament. Even when Jeremiah was describing the way that Trump was responding to just this challenge to the logic of white supremacy. I mean, right. I think I'm more prepared to say than I was in the past that I feel the American people are looking, yes, they're looking for king, but they're also looking for a way to inherit civilization, which we already assume must be king's civilization, black civilization, a moral, a human civilization. And what I got a lot from today's conversation is we see more and more how that will be possible. And even that martyrdom or that heroism of the Iranian people, I think does make it more possible for the American people and youth to no longer need white supremacy. I mean, I just keep thinking of what young Americans are thinking of all this and what they're seeing. And my instinct is that many of them are saying, I mean, I want to become like that. I want to have something to live for. I want to have something to stand by. I mean, I want to actually take a position against white supremacy, as these people of West Asia have so heroically done. And we can agree that that is our common task, especially in this nation. I just feel that the way this war has shaken out and the type of human beings it has produced will really have consequence for the American consciousness in terms of just what is going to be possible in that dismantling of an imperial white supremacist logic. Yeah, I think I just wanted to emphasize again this point you had made. You had brought it up yesterday when we were talking, but a king strategy. And the reason that we look to the Revolutionary Corps, especially the ones who had lived into the 21st century, like Lawson and Nash, is because faithfully, like unyieldingly, they were still searching for the deployment of that 21st century king strategy. And much like many political assessments we've made in the last few months, I think increasingly can be seen in that light. That we see that the most conscious of the Americans' political movement, I see it as a reach for that Kingian vision. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that free school enters this event differently than we would have entered an event a year ago.
Yeah.
And I think, and thank you, Emily, for the work that you've done, especially on this narrative. It's, and I would say that all of the artists and children that are participating are very excited. For those of you who don't know, the Stylistic Review, very excited. In fact, their manager and lead singer asked, is it a private event or can we bring our friends? I said, please bring your friends. And of course, Bobby Zankel, and then many of the people who will be reading, and it is a diverse group of people, all the way from my former classmate at Lincoln, Carol Black, who is herself a force to be dealt with, to members of the Nation of Islam and children. I think the children are still involved. Naima.
Yeah, 2 high school students.
And a couple high school. This is very important. And so we are perfecting this capacity to do what Emily has really worked. And I can't wait for it to be over because I want her to get some rest. You're going to get some rest.
Well, also, I think there's a lot of young men participating.
This is very important, very important.
I think I just think that's really important.
I do. And, Emily has envisioned this and reached out. And it's not easy because people have lives and their hearts are in the right place, but they work, they have family is a big thing, the difficulties people are having, etc. But somehow they're coming through. But also, what you're saying, Michelle, is really true because that panel and town hall are going to be very important. And for me to see how strong our ideas are resonating with people who are not free school members. I think this will be very important, to have Reverend Kavanaugh. This is no small thing. First of all, to have it at Mother Bethel.
Yeah.
Which, and I know last night that I think it was Emily who said to me that the congregation at St. Thomas's is different than the congregation at Mother Bethel, which is true, although that wasn't a St. Thomas's congregation. There were other forces which kind of brought it down a little bit. But I think being at Mother Bethel, that very powerful congregation, that united and politically aware congregation is highly significant. And also, it's so interesting, Michelle, people still resonate with King.
Yeah.
They do. And, I know Michelle was asking me yesterday about Lawson. I think Lawson is going to be a big factor in this regarding, our reading of Taylor Branch, which has been very, as well as, Sven Becker. That work on that work on Taylor Branch has been very important to clarifying how we understand King and how we situate King. But people want to know, and they feel like Lawson, we don't really know King. What was all that about, and how do we come to understand? So I think I think it's going to be very important at this time By the way, Emily, are we hitting strong on this 250th and King and Jefferson? Oh, by the way, we have to read the call on both days.
Yeah, sounds good.
But make sure, I don't know how we do it. Let's think about it. But we have to bring this King Jefferson thing together.
I could see that coming in on especially the second day and especially the
yes.
panel in the town hall.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like a really concrete element of this event will also be bringing like how does King also speak to us, but also in the city of Philadelphia.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think obviously his spirit lives through the city, and like that was also very highlighted in a recent social media post that we had done to really dive into King's various visits to Philadelphia and some of the very institutions that we're inviting to be part of this, but also I think the shadow of also this being the city of quote unquote revolution, but in what sense? Not just the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of the country here in, say, like these historic like buildings in this independence mall, but also like what actually made this country and who actually made this country and what actually constitutes the making of a new or an alternate civilization.
Yes.
And I think that'll come out when I think that gets juxtaposed. The other thing I was just gonna say is I was reflecting on this conversation and then also the one that we had as part of the Lucian Blackwell reading group on Tuesday in advance of this very dangerous 8 p.m. deadline was also something that came out in that conversation that I think speaks to the urgency of this moment, but also really helps me frame this is also one of the members, Geraldine, had said like, actually, this is a moment in which children are really watching. Children are watching us, and they're watching what like how we get on the same page together, or if we don't, they will remember that. And it also reminded me of just like why we center the role of young people and children in our narrative, and why like children, like we have said many times, like children know that children are being killed in Gaza, in Manab, in Iran, but also in Lebanon. And like, it is also worth noting that we're dedicating these 2 days to the 168 children killed in the Manab school on the very first day of this war with Iran. And I think that it is a time in which there is so much actual, like, even if we do not quite yet have, like, the movement as crystallized as a form to be able to march into the streets, I think there is a lot that we must do to be able to come together around the spirit of King and to be able to say that, it just reminds me, not to jump too much, but that when we study figures like James Lawson and Diane Nash and their utmost, like, courage and bravery to do what had not been done before, which was to confront white supremacy, not just to desegregate, but to face down white supremacy in its most ugliest and violent forms. In this like centuries-long defeat of Reconstruction, like you have to ask yourself like what it took to prepare them for this. I guess like to use your words, a battle of a new type of nonviolence, and the way that I think one anecdote comes back to me is that as we're talking about sacrifice and we're talking about the future, Diane Nash would speak to, like people who are preparing to go onto these campaigns, but were afraid, rightfully afraid, for the kind of violence or like, that would break out. And she would say, like, remember, we're not just doing this for ourselves, but we're doing this for all the generations of children that will come after us. And they will have to know that, like, we did this because we love them.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very Baldwinian spirit, but it's also like the spirit that we're also, rooting ourselves and also reminding, the American people that sacrifice and struggle are real concepts, and it is possible to, temper the human soul to be able to love, or even like, have love be the ultimate concretization of human solidarity, and like actually choose that in a time when all the stakes are so high, and the future does hang in balance based on what we do and what we choose as the American people.
Yeah. It's beautifully said.
I was just wondering if you would do a study of the Philadelphia Negro in terms of the class stratification among the black community in comparison to then, and how it's very similar to now. And it proves that Du Bois was a very good social scientist because he was able to show data that applies today in terms of how the black community is stratified between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie in the same manner as is written in that book. I was wondering if you ever considered doing that for not just young people, but people who are middle-aged or people who are older, so they can understand that they should study Du Bois because his social science applies across different generations. I'm not sure if you consider doing that or not.
In some ways we are doing it in our sociology. We have sociology side groups, but we put it on pause a little bit because we've been working really hard for the 250th. But I think that's a good point because actually what I would argue is I genuinely think we don't know enough what are the real stratifications in the black community are.
Well,
for example, there's a category of the lumpen proletariat. Or even more than class stratification, do we even know the condition of black folk, especially because of the decades of counter-revolution? Like, how did deindustrialization impact really today at this point? What are the kinds of jobs people have?
And I'm taking this from somebody who worked as an administrator. I'm not taking it to myself, but a person I was very close to was an administrator at the school district level. What they said at that time was that the proletariat in Philadelphia is mostly in the service industry. And that what happens is, if people come out of high school, if they are not in a college track, or if they go to college and they're a low-income African American, they have to drop out because they don't have enough money, or they feel like they're not doing well academically, then they fall back into the service industries here in the city. And that people are not really, the whole factory thing was one in which you could sustain a family on a factory wage, but what people do not do, they do not go into the trade track because a lot of the trade unions, they want you to pass an entry-level type exam, and sometimes the levels, and sometimes the levels of people's sense of math and reading is so low that they're not able to get through those entry-level exams to get into carpentry or to get into plumbing or to get into electrical, where they could make a wage, where they could sustain a family well. But right now you have too many people in the service industry who are in the proletariat in Philadelphia. What happens with the bourgeoisie is they tend to go out into the suburbs, or a lot of places they go is Chestnut Hill or Westmount area. A lot of them live out there, but they do not associate mostly with the people who are in the working class. So it's like a great divide there. But what a good social scientist should do now is determine how new minorities such as the Indians and the Chinese, how they have come into the working space and how they have affected the whole social dynamic between the black proletariat and the black bourgeoisie, because the higher educated Indians do better than what the highly educated blacks did over 40 years ago. I mean, they're getting into spaces that
we should talk about it.
I mean, they're able to get into spaces, especially at the corporate level, that a lot of very highly educated blacks were not able to do over 30 years ago. Because right now you have the guy who's at Google, he's an Indian, and you have several Indian CEOs in tech, and even though they're brown people, they're able to infiltrate spaces that very highly educated blacks were not able to do like for many decades. So I'm saying like this whole different dynamic should be explored by social scientists, like in my opinion, and Du Bois is probably the best one over many decades, but you should have someone come along now and like try to study this stuff now that's going on now.
I think we definitely feel that there is a need for social science and a scientific study of the people, the structures, the institutions, and the relationships between the people. I'm gonna read one last comment and then I think we should probably end for the day. Bambala, I think responding to the discussion about the upcoming event, says, never forget the children. Trump will always be remembered as the president who bombed a little girl's school.
Yeah.
He is way worse than Sandy Hook. Israel is the ringleader of child bombs. And yeah, with that, we should end, but we'll see everybody next week.
Yeah, we'll have a live stream in all likelihood on Saturday. Hopefully we will, and then Friday we'll probably record.
We will try our best, but Mother Bethel is a big church, and it's a new setup for us. But we will try our best to have it in some form for people who are interested in it, whether that's live or later on.
Or uploaded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.